Welcome to Chapter Chumps, a reading podcast where three regular guys read a book and then talk about it. Today on the podcast, we are going to be discussing the final chapters, which is chapters 9 through the epilogue of H.G. Wells's The Time Machine. I am your host, Connor. I am joined as ever by my two co-hosts, Connor and Josh. I have to start this podcast by saying I typically go back and re-listen to the episodes. And re-listening to our last episode was deeply embarrassing for me. Because I usually have 2 beers max on a podcast discussion. That's what I average, 2 beers. And last time I got way more drunk than anyone ever should just while doing a podcast. And I have to start this podcast by owning up to that and apologizing to you both because it was a train wreck. I am so sorry you had to deal with me that way.
We had fun.
What? Yeah, I mean, it wasn't any different than usual.
Yeah.
No.
It was noticeable towards the end for me, but otherwise it was a pretty normal experience, honestly.
No, yeah, it was just towards the end. It was funny. I don't know. It was fine.
Yeah. Well, it's just like I thank you both, for being so understanding and considerate, because like I was listening to it and I'm like yelling at myself. I'm like, just shut up. Just let Connor and Josh say something. And I'm just like going on and I'll like, and I just keep repeating. I'll be like, and I will say this. Let me just say this. And then I went on for like 10 minutes. And
I did. That's what I started to notice. Yes.
Yeah. I think we need like a code word or something. Like if I ever get that way again, can you just be like, Connor, the time machine. Remember the time machine. Yeah.
And now we'll just turn this whole podcast into fucking that Star Trek episode that I'm blinking, Darmok.
Yeah, well, yes. Yeah, that episode I haven't
Connor,
seen.
Connor, the second episode of our time machine.
Yes. I thought they were going to say turn it into an intervention.
Yeah, I mean that too.
I hope it's not that bad. Although I did feel pretty bad listening back to it. I was like, what? I'm just talking about a book. Why did I get so slammed? It was so stupid. So
yeah,
anyways,
no one gives a shit.
Yeah, I give a shit. That's why
I know
I
you
have
do.
to, and I really did. Let me just say this. I don't want to harp on it. Let me just say this. That's me. I'm having.
Then you harp on it and say it
at my own expense. I know, but I really. I'm sorry, guys. I'm I did not mean to steamroll over you that way, and I'm looking forward to a very fruitful talk from all of us at the end here. So
honestly, though, no, I mean you didn't. It didn't feel like you were steamrolling us or me. It just felt. It was just like a thing where it's like, yeah, I'll just let him go. Get it out of the system.
Yeah.
Just entertaining me like I don't know, some old grandpa.
Yeah. That's pretty much how it went. Yeah.
I mean, I just remember. I remember that episode of Dune Dudes that we did where I took an edible before we started recording it, and
first I'm hearing of that.
The entire episode, I have no idea what I was saying like the entire time. And I was like, I've never listened back to that episode.
Yeah.
But I feel like if I did, it would feel similarly to you listening back to this last Chapter Chumps episode. Yeah, I mean, so podcasting is an art form where I think once in a while it's okay to go a little bit past the line.
Yeah, that's the razor's edge I walk each episode. for Chapter Chumps. At least I don't know why. I feel like if I'm doing a book discussion, it's just fun.
I mean, it's kind of funny because like I feel like Green Dudes is like it's maybe more of an appropriate venue to do that, but
maybe, but
I don't know.
It just schedule wise, it just doesn't work out.
No, you're right. You're right.
Anyways, guys, how are you doing? Anything you want to share before we jump into it? Josh, how's it going?
Going all right. I got to watch a Zeppelin land on Saturday. That was pretty cool.
A Zeppelin?
Yes, there was a golf tournament near me, and the cable providers had a Zeppelin just hovering around the golf course for aerial shots. And I say Zeppelin because it was literally an airship built by the Zeppelin company out in Europe. It was branded Goodyear, so I thought it was a Goodyear blimp at first, but it was not the actual Goodyear blimp that you can like look up online of where it is, because the nearest one was in Nebraska, which is not Connecticut. Last time I checked.
No, you're right about that.
But the funny thing was, I first saw it on Saturday when I went to go to take my flight lesson for the week, and I live in Middletown and drove all the way up to Hartford, and I'm coming down the utility road to the airport looking south back to the way I came, and there's this giant fucking airship just hanging off in the distance over Cromwell, which is near where I live, and it's like, what the fuck? How did I not see that until I was literally as far away from it as I was traveling today? And then I had my flight lesson, got back, and all the support equipment for the blimp Zeppelin, whatever, was being stationed at the airport. So I just hung out in the parking lot and waited for it to show up, which took an hour and a half. But I have a new car now, so I don't mind sitting out in the parking lot for an hour and a half.
Right.
And I got some video of that, got some really cool photos of it coming in the land, and then Sunday it was super fucking hot, but I took Nova to the dog park anyway, went to try to see it in the air again, up close. Got a couple photos of that, and also took Nova to an ice cream store where we got like puppy ice cream for her.
Oh, that's really cute. Can I just say on the Zeppelin, isn't there some like ridiculously low number of active Zeppelins in the world? Like, isn't it kind of crazy that you saw that?
I think you're thinking of blimps. Actually, there's a difference between there is a difference. Blimps are really like balloons with a gondola, whereas the Zeppelin has the internal structure in the gas bag. There's some the lines are getting kind of blurry these days, as far as I know, but the number of like active dirigibles and airships is fairly low. But we might see more in the future. I've seen a lot of stories about tech companies in particular developing airships for heavy lift applications and for networking and all sorts of things. And there's some really interesting designs being developed in various places in the world.
I have one thing to say, Josh, about this.
Not what I was guessing, but okay.
You know, like Led Zeppelin.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The band, or the rock and roll band.
Yep. Wasn't what I was expecting, so good idea.
Originally, they were going to call themselves Metal Blimp, but
that name was taken.
That
was actually it was I think that was actually a white blues singer from the 50s took that name.
Yeah.
Metal Blimp.
Those fuckers, those white blues singers. You know?
Yeah, it was trying to like appropriate.
That's what they did.
I don't know.
That's just how it was.
Those fuckers. I was trying to think of like a kind of like it's kind of like a Fatty Arbuckle kind of thing, like trying to steal that kind of name, but ended up calling themselves Metal Blimp.
Yeah,
it's just like they think that's cool.
Yeah, you know, I'm sure the jokes will get better as the podcast
goes. That's history for you, though.
Yeah, Connor, how are you doing? What's going on with you?
Yeah, I'm doing okay. I'm doing pretty good. I thought leading up to today, I thought I was actually going to be working tonight. And so I was like, okay, well, I could do the podcast. I wake up, gotta just hectically, quickly read this fucking book, do the podcast,
Yeah.
go to work. And then I was like, okay, it looks like I have one day off this week. That sucks. But the schedule was just like kind of fucked up. So it turns out I do have tonight off and tomorrow off. So,
Nice.
um, and I found that out just at like 6 in the morning this morning. So I was like, just such a fucking massive relief.
Yeah, you must have had a great sleep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I did end up, but I initially I couldn't fall asleep. So what happened is like this morning I actually I read most of the book like semi deliriously this morning. So it's going to be interesting like what I remember.
Yeah.
Cuz I was like yeah, like running on like no sleep and just like yeah, semi delirious and
You're like, oh, I gotta finish this, and then
yeah, well cuz at that point, I was like, "Oh fuck, well, if I need to get enough sleep, but I also need enough time before the podcast to finish this book." So it's like I better read most of it now, and so I can sleep a little bit later. Um, so we'll see if that paid off or not.
yeah,
But that's what happened. Yeah, and now I'm feeling pretty all right.
nice. From okay to pretty good to pretty all right.
Yeah,
Good progression.
Sweet.
yeah, I'm heading in the right direction.
Yeah, I'd say so. I'd say so.
How you doing, Connor?
I'm good. Thank you for asking. I'm good. The one big thing of news I want to share. So tomorrow is the last day of the school year. So I'm gonna go to work tomorrow, and then when I clock out and I leave tomorrow, I'm gonna be on summer vacation. So that's my thing. That's it. This is like
Nice.
Christmas Eve for teachers.
That's awesome.
So the school year's ended, but the students have probably been out for a week or two now, right?
Not quite how it works at an elementary school. I think if I were working like in a high school, like yes,
Mhm.
because they finished their school year with all the testing and stuff.
Right.
But no, my day ends when the kids' days end. So they graduated last week, the 5th grade class, but then they still have to be in school for a week. Yeah,
That sucks.
it does. Yeah. The teachers think it sucks. The kids think it sucks. They know. They're like, why are we here?
Yeah.
But
That's when you roll in the TV card or whatever the technology equivalent is these days.
God, I wish, Josh, because it'd be so much easier because the technology equivalent is the smart board, the Promethean board. And it's like, you don't have to roll anything in because there's no chalkboards anymore.
What is it called?
The Promethean board.
The Promethean board, like Prometheus?
Yeah. I think that's just a brand. I'm sure there's other...
Like
Probably.
from Prometheus and Bob?
Yeah, like Prometheus and Bob from Kablam.
Wow.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, the kids don't get that reference, but it's
I
funny.
barely
Yeah,
got
it
that
goes
reference.
above their head. Because Josh didn't watch Nickelodeon as a kid.
I watched SpongeBob.
Yeah.
Fairly Odd Parents.
It doesn't fucking count. We're not talking about that era of Nickelodeon.
Kablam predated all of that. Yeah, Kablam was...
I do remember Kalam a little bit, but I barely watched it. You're right.
Yeah, that was some good stuff. Anyways, yeah, it's like you always have the smart... It's mounted to the wall. It's like instead of a chalkboard, it's a giant iPad, That's what I use.
Yeah. I mean, we just had the fucking projector screens at Shen.
I know. I remember.
And when I went to college, it was a projector screen on a whiteboard. So it just kind of did double duty. And honestly, that was fine for 90% of what you did in a classroom.
Yeah.
And they also have projector screens if you were like watching an actual movie. But other than that, it was, perfectly fine.
Yeah. The times they are have changed already, as they say.
Thank you, Mr. Dillon.
Speaking of changing times, things change.
Whoa.
Yeah, like speaking of that, huh? Let's talk about the ending of the time machine. We're going to talk about chapters 9 through 12 and the epilogue.
Hooray!
Yeah. Any? Do we want to share anything in general before we? Sometimes I just ask, like, what did you think, or do you want to just jump in?
We should just jump in.
All right, let's do it. Let's jump in, and we'll do all that at the end. So chapter 9. This picks up from my drunk self did a horrible job of talking about this last time, but it's like they're in the green porcelain building.
Yep, the museum.
Yeah, in the museum. Connor, did you want to jump in there?
I'm just saying you're being too hard on yourself. You were fine. Everything's fine.
Yeah.
All right. You sure? Okay. You know what? You're right. Just to prove that I can do it, I'm going to have like 6 beers tonight and just see how it goes.
Yeah. I'm fine. I can drive.
Yeah, I can.
I'm actually I'm better driving this way.
Yeah, someone.
Podcast. It's okay.
Like, was I over the legal limit for podcasting? I think that's the question.
Yeah, there should be some sort of machine you can like a breathalyzer.
Yeah, that's what we need, the podcastalyzer.
Yeah, to see if you're too fucked up to pod.
Yeah.
I think that would probably impact a lot of I think a lot of podcasts would be canceled due to that reason.
Yeah. Good
Like
point.
you know how high they get on the Joe Rogan show, right?
That's true. That's probably why they don't do it. Although I think maybe I just got to give it to Joe Rogan. He's probably a lot more eloquent than I was.
I don't think so. I don't think that's true.
I'm not saying I agree with what he says, but like he can talk. You know what I mean?
Connor, I legitimately think you're like a much better speaker than Joe Rogan.
Wow.
Definitely.
Like leaps and bounds. Even when you're, I think even when you're drunk, I'm not even joking. I'm not trying to razz you up.
Trying to butter me up. Come on.
I mean, to me though, Joe Rogan sounds like a caveman.
Yeah, I guess you're
like.
right.
Jeez.
All right. Well, you know what? It's all in the past now. Thinking about time and moving on, it's all in the past. You're right. I'm not going to bring it up again. We're just going to move forward through the 4th dimension here. Here we go. Chapter 9, they're in the museum. They're just leaving it after, the time traveler and Weena, they stock up on all these supplies because he thinks he's going to have this big showdown with the Morlocks. And the plan is he wants to go back to the Sphinx because he's like, I'm sure the time machine is in there. And with the makeshift club that I have, which is just a lever from something in the museum, he's like, I can break it open. I'll get the time machine, and then we'll just see what happens. So he's trying to make his way back to where the White Sphinx statue is. But it's a long distance, and Weena's getting tired, and it's getting dark. And they're about to, they have to go through this forest, or like he chooses to go through the forest. He wants to set up camp. And as he's going through the forest, he realizes the Morlocks are gaining on him. And he lights a fire, and then they continue, and he's lighting matches, and he makes another fire. He falls asleep at the second fire, and he's awoken by the Morlocks. He doesn't know where Weena is. And he has to fend off the Morlocks. He kills a few of them, at least. Yeah. And then he kind of finds this hill in the middle of the forest where he has some relative safety as the forest is like burning around him because the first fire caught on the trees and the forest is burning and the Morlocks are freaking out. And where's Weena? And he's just bashing these Morlocks over the head like fucking whack-a-mole. And I think the chapter sort of like ends with him sort of like lamenting, not knowing where Weena is. And then it's like just before he makes it back to the Sphinx statue. I think that's chapter 9 there. Josh, do you want to start us off with your thoughts on this chapter?
I remembered Weena didn't make it through this fucking book, but I forgot it was just like she disappears in a forest fire.
Yeah.
I thought the Morlocks got her, and somehow this is worse, where it's ambiguous and it was probably the forest fire.
Mm.
Well, I'm happy that we didn't see her like disfigured, half-eaten
Or
corpse
burned.
or
Yeah,
burned.
that
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
It's very I don't know. It I don't want to say Victorian, but it's like that sense of like it's not grotesque. It's just kind of she's not there anymore.
Hmm.
But it's still very morbid. Whoops. And I don't know. Like you see I guess we'll get into more in the next chapter, but you see the time traveler is very upset by her loss.
Yeah.
But it doesn't feel like it's what it should be. It doesn't feel weighty enough.
That's what I was gonna
Uh,
say. Jumping off of that, that's what feels Victorian to me. Like you were saying, like
yeah.
it's kind of like like he feels upset at her loss. He is like lonely from it, but he doesn't like mourn her as a person or as like a whole individual.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a very Victorian, like stiff upper lip, like keep moving on kind of attitude.
Yeah. Which Victorian and maybe just British.
Yeah.
Keep calm and carry on. Although
Yeah.
I don't know if bashing Morlock heads is a definition of keep calm, but
He definitely moved on. That's for sure.
yeah, definitely. Um, yeah, he definitely makes a lot of mistakes in this chapter. Hi Nova. Someone has the zoomies. He decides that he'd rather push on through the forest at night, um, while exhausted, and fumbles matches. He falls asleep in the forest, having set a fire. Um, he does not take Weena's feelings into account at all because she is effectively petrified before they even go into the forest, and has completely fainted by the time he sat to the campfire.
Yeah.
He's
I'm
not
not
even
like,
sure
convinced that
she's
she.
alive entirely.
Yeah,
He's like
I'm not
I
convinced that she didn't just have a heart attack entering the forest
yeah,
and has been dead the entire chapter.
exactly.
Yeah. True.
Um, but yeah, what is the darn it? Sorry, I'm trying to look at my notes and I keep ending up in the wrong spot. Chapter 9. Um, yeah. My only note for chapter 9 is actually about the loss of Weena. Um, I felt in that I felt the intensest wretchedness for the horrible death of little Weena. It seemed an overwhelming calamity, which kind of goes against what I was saying. But now in this familiar room, it is more like the sorrow of a dream than an actual loss.
Right.
So it's I don't know. I I definitely get that feeling that he's describing of like loss from a dream,
Yeah.
but at the same time, it's like he's describing this whole experience like it is a dream now, and I don't know if that detracts from it, from the credibility of the story. Probably not, given the context of how he's telling the story. But I maybe it reduces the impact on his own emotions. It reduces the impact of the loss on himself by likening it to a dream. I don't know. It's hard to
Yeah.
explain. It's really hard feeling to explain, but it feels like he's maybe in shock and is trying to lessen the impact for both himself and his audience.
I do think there's a bit of that for sure. And like as we go through these final chapters, um, I was surprised at how often this idea of like, was it just a dream keeps coming up because in the previous episode, one thing that we were discussing that like was clear is, you know, is the time traveler really time traveling, or is this just a story because the framing device of the book is that it's a conversation, you know? And you know, at the time, I'm like rambling on and on about it, and it kind of felt like, oh, you know, maybe I'm just like picking too much up on this tiny point. But I was surprised at actually how much H.G. Wells kind of comes back to that idea in the ending of the book. And this is like the first big instance of the time traveler saying like it was like the sorrow of a dream. And then like later on, he's kind of grappling himself with like, did it really happen? Was it a dream? Which sort of brings us to like the final chapter and the epilogue.
Yep.
And so like your point about like, is he in shock? I think a little bit, because like even he sort of comes to doubt himself. And I don't think it's just, we'll have to come back to like Weena's death or possible death. I guess we don't even know, to be honest, but like the loss of Weena and the time traveler's reaction and feelings towards it, because I think we get a little bit more insight to it towards the end of the book, and I'll save it for then, and we can kind of come back to it then.
Okay. He does seem pretty convinced that she's dead, though.
Yes, he does. Yeah. I mean, I think you're definitely. I kind of kept wondering if she was going to come back somehow.
I think this is before that kind of that became a trope. So, yeah, I had that feeling too, but it wasn't like certain. It was like, oh, this is me keying into modern storytelling aspects.
Yeah. And I think it's cool that you remembered, Josh, because I didn't remember. I truly pretty much only remembered the crabs. I'm excited to talk about the crabs. I didn't remember Weena dying.
Yeah, I remember Weena being a character who was just kind of there when he was in the 800,000 time frame. And then she died and he left. That's kind of how I remembered it. And then, you know, the crabs.
Connor.
And then, yeah.
Oh, sorry, Josh.
Nope, I didn't have anything to add.
Connor, I do think there's going to be more to talk about on this point of like the loss of Weena as we go through these next chapters. But since we're bringing it up here, what did you make of this moment?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I was kind of expecting it to happen. I honestly, I don't know. I felt like he was a little bit reckless with Weena. I like he being, you know, she was in his care essentially. Like, I mean, it's tough because like, you know, he described like maybe he couldn't get her off of him if he tried. You know, she was attached to him, so you know, leaving her behind wouldn't have been easy. But I do feel like going into like certain danger with her was, it just was a little bit reckless, and obviously he endangered her, and she ended up dying, and or something happened to her. Yeah, so he's just a little bit careless, I think, in that regard. Um, I mean, I don't know. Not that he took any great oath or anything, but there's just like a slight callousness to his character that I think it's intentionally there, but it does rub me the wrong way a little bit. And yeah, what else? So the other thing that I didn't mention before was that, and this is not about the story, this is about my copy of the book. I think our chapters are all fucked up because there was parts of the book, like parts of the museum chapter that you guys were talking about last week was in my chapter 9.
Oh yeah.
Really?
Yeah. So, and then I looked it up, and there's two different. There's like the Heinemann text and the Halt text of these books, and I guess the manuscripts are slightly different. So I think that's where this discrepancy was. So anyways, I mean, we're all caught up now, and you know, I finished the book, but
yeah. Well, you should have said something last week.
Well,
I guess Connor didn't give you a chance.
It wasn't to me, to be honest. Well, no. In all honesty, I was like, well, I guess they could have mentioned some like I was like, well, I could have just like not taken that in, you know. And then
Fair.
then I also was like, well, I don't think it's worth it. But so I thought that was interesting. So yeah, I think, I mean, maybe it's like the chapters are just like different, like some of them are combined or uh you know like truncated or something. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Because like I was saying, I'm reading a copy from archive.org, which is like, it's clearly a scan of a very 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 old edition of the book.
That's
um
pretty cool though that you're
it
doing
is
that.
Yeah.
cool. Yeah, no, it's
I
cool. And it's like, what was that?
no, I think you had more to say.
No, I mean, it's cool because it's like stylized in a different way, and it's fun to read, and it looks kind of all worn and stuff, and so yeah, it's been fun. But yeah, just one of those things. Like, funny how we there's like these different slight differences, and sometimes they're more than slight. As far as the
I'm
actual
surprised.
chapter, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I was gonna say I'm surprised that it's like actual parts of the chapters were shifted around and not like, oh, they omitted a word or a slur or something. It's like, no, they actually like shifted whole paragraphs into a different chapter.
Yeah, well, it was unclear to me
Back
because
up.
like we didn't get into any, there was no discrepancies until the chapter 8-9 range. Like, because my first thought was like, well, maybe like your chapters are like two of my chapters combined. But there's like, I don't think there's in like extra chapter or anything, or it's my idea is that it's just kind of shifted around slightly.
Hmm.
But
Strange.
yeah, anyways, I also thought, starting a forest fire was a little goofy. And well, like him looking back and like laughing, oh haha, I set the forest ablaze.
Yeah.
Which is just funny. I don't know, it's like one of those things where it's like in a modern context, I guess maybe reads a bit differently. And then of course, like, it catches up to them, and I guess that ends up being uh working in his favor. But yeah, it was a good chapter. Rip Weena, she was a real one. I was sad that he didn't end up being able to bring her back. I think that would have been his incontrovertible proof there to bring back a creature from the future.
Yeah.
I'm Lord Victorious.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
you know what would be really interesting, and considering it's a time travel story, it's like, okay, maybe he didn't bring her back to his original timeline, but as a time traveler, what if there were like a sequel to the time machine where he uses the time machine to try to save Weena?
Yeah.
That kind of brings it, time travel stories always have to eventually deal with, can you
Paradoxes.
use time travel, right, to like go back to your own
I think this
timeline?
was
And
I think this was written before those kinds of paradoxes were really thought about.
no, it was. That's why I think it would be like
So
a more of an interesting exercise, like today, to try to create such a story. Like,
yeah,
Well, this is it's like copyright free or whatever. So I
oh
mean,
yeah,
Connor,
you're right.
have at it, dude.
Yeah, you know
You could
what?
write
yeah.
this.
It saves her from the forest fire after his original self leaves and brings her back. And
Well,
there's a problem with the
no,
time machine, and they land like 5 years later from the original
I think
departure
what he
date or something.
does, I think what he does is he sneaks up on Weena while the earlier him is sleeping, and just carries her to safety, and
And he
And
steals the
bring.
matches
and
because
that's
Yeah,
why
he
when
yeah,
he
forgot
yeah,
to bring
wakes
them.
up. Oh yeah, that's why when he wakes up, she's not there. Right.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
You could have it fit into. I mean, you'd have to have it fit into the events of the story. That'd be
Yeah.
we could be Doctor Who showrunners. Easy.
Oh yeah, the three of us. The three of us. We could make up one RTD. One letter per person.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, it's almost too perfect.
Yeah.
No, I get what you mean, Connor. Like, sort of, again, like the recklessness of the time traveler and like the way that his destruction of the forest reads differently, I think is a great point because, you know, today the maintenance of the environment is like it's like so fragile, you know. But here, 1895, it still feels very much like, okay, so this is like the colonizing Englishmen just running
Yes.
amok and destroying
Exactly.
the natural resources.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's not dissimilar to how some of those golden era explorers were, you know, just kind of carelessly trawling through these undiscovered you know, vistas in
Right.
different continents, you know. Um and then also it's like this is pre Smokey the Bear, you know.
Yeah, dude, that's so funny that I swear I was thinking that. I think when Josh was first talking about it, he was like, he set the forest on fire. I was like, yeah, you know, that's why they had to make Smokey. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
true. It's
This
true.
led to Smokey the Bear's inception.
Yeah. I mean, Smokey is pretty old. I think Smokey's at least from like the 30s or something. Like
I
he's
think he's from the
Probably.
50s.
Yeah, could be, but even so, he's an old bear. Yeah. Okay. I had a couple quick things from chapter 9. Hopefully they're quick, anyways, that I want to mention.
1944.
1940, right smack dab in the middle.
Yep.
Some say Smokey the Bear ended World War II. Thank you, Smokey.
That's a claim.
He ended the ultimate forest fire. Thank you for your service, Smokey.
We salute you.
So the two things I want to mention, I guess I'll go off. They're both related to what we were already talking about. I guess I'll go through them quickly in order. In my copy, page 68, this line really jumped out at me. The time traveler says, this is like midway down the page. And now I was to see the most weird and horrible thing, I think, of all that I beheld in that future age. And I was like, whoa, what's that going to be? He's saying this is the singularly most bizarre, weird thing he saw. I don't know if he means specifically from this specific point. I don't think he's actually accounting for the things that he sees in the further future, I guess. But anyways, this is when he's talking about the whole forest being on fire, and he's on that hill, and the whole forest is burning down, and the Morlocks are in this like kind of like fog. They're like so dazzled and bewildered by like this amount, because the matches themselves have been enough to make them flee. And so now
Right.
imagine the entire forest, the entire landscape, their whole world essentially to them is engulfed in fire, and so their reaction is like utter insanity. And the time traveler thinks that this is like the most crazy thing that he's seen the whole time is this moment.
Yeah, I got when the Morlocks were running around from the fires, I was imagining like moths confused by a flame, something like insects that are just very confused by, super bright lights, and you see some of the Morlocks run right into the fire because they can't see, and that's what really made me think of like, oh, like it's not the same as like a moth that's literally attracted to the light, but it's like, yeah, they don't know the danger because apparently forest fires are incredibly rare, but so is rain somehow because of this perfect world that's been created.
Yeah, maybe.
I don't know.
And I did want to add to this too. So, in just further down, he says this whole space was as bright as day with the reflection of the fire. In the center was a hillock or a tumulus surmounted by a scorched hawthorn. Now, I would not know what a tumulus is, but I mentioned that that my copy has these little footnotes for like certain very old terms. And my book tells me that it is a small hill or mound used as a burial site. And I felt like this was interesting in conjunction with 2 points. One is that when he initially travels to the future, he talks about how, like, oh, none of the Eloi, they don't seem to like age or have any elderly people. And as far as I could tell, there's not even any cemeteries or crematoriums. It's like, what do they do with their dead people? Do they even age and die? And so here in the chapter where Weena is essentially killed, we get this passing reference to a burial site. And it's like, not only is maybe the mystery a little bit answered, where it's like, okay, like the time traveler seems to be commenting on this area as a possible burial site. And it's like, for the Eloi, for the Morlocks, like, we don't really know. And the time traveler is wrong about a lot of things. So it's like, take it with a grain of salt. But according to the text here, that's what the time traveler believes this is, that they're actually on top of a burial site. And it feels like kind of poetic that he happens to stumble upon this in the very place where, Weena seems to meet her end.
Yeah, that's a interesting connection. Sorry, I was trying to find that part of the book in my Kindle copy, because the Kindle, you just tap on the word and it'll
do you
tell
see
you. I did find it.
Oh, you did. Okay.
But the Wikipedia entry for tumulus, or plural tumuli, mentions that tumuli are also known as barrows, burial mounds housed, or in Siberia and Central Asia, as kurgans. But barrows stood out to me because you have the barrow wights from Lord of the Rings that we read previously.
Yes.
And I guess that's what that word means.
Yeah.
They are the barrow wights are basically grave ghosts.
Yes. Right.
To try to translate that a little bit too much.
Yeah, it seems like it must be an English thing, and probably, of course, more common from this time, because it's like, Tolkien wasn't too far off from Wells. So
right,
to an English reader, you read the word barrow, they're probably like, oh yeah, totally. But to us in 2025, it's like, what the fuck? Barrows?
It's not like a wheelbarrow, though.
Tumulus? Yeah. And then last thing for me,
just some words we should bring back.
Maybe I think
we should really dig deep into our history and bring back some cool words.
I think part of the problem is that we don't bury people in a mound, so we don't use the word.
I guess we can bring that back too.
Yeah, like if you're gonna bring back the word tumulus, it's like, well, you gotta have a tumuli to reference, right? It's like,
that's a great point. Yeah.
And cemeteries do take up a lot of land.
I mean, but at what point are the cemeteries? At what point? At what point are the cemeteries going to be filled up, and we need to do something else?
Sooner than you might think.
Yeah.
Where I live, I'm like surrounded by cemeteries. I feel like it's insane just how many dead people I'm around at all times.
Do you see dead people?
I've been in New York and Boston, a couple other old American cities, and those little church cemeteries that are just in the middle of a city freak me out, because they're usually raised up a little bit compared to ground level for the rest of the city. And there's one or two where I've passed by and I realized, like, the cemetery, like the surface of the cemetery goes like 8 or 10 feet above street level, which made me realize, like, as I'm walking by the wall on the sidewalk, it's like, I am at the same level as a bunch of dead people right now.
Yeah.
Like, they are at my head level, or like varying, obviously, but it's like 6 feet from where they were buried is where I'm at right now. And that's very disconcerting to me when I pass those places.
Yeah. in some ways, we're kind of all 6 feet under, relatively.
At what point do we start just shooting bodies into space?
We've already
Free
done that.
food.
We've been doing that since the 90s.
Yeah,
Wow.
but like for everybody, just to like get rid of them.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't think we'll be doing that for everybody.
I think maybe we should start.
I mean, is
fact,
it that
one of
much more
the people up-
expensive?
Yes. It very much is. And
mean,
usually they shoot ashes into space.
Okay.
So
No, we're talking about corpses. And
Yeah.
the thing is, I think if you make a large enough catapult, it would be pretty reasonable in terms of cost.
Yes, exactly.
it would have
Use
to be a
the
very
catapult.
large catapult.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but just get Elon Musk on the case, and we could hash that out pretty
He could
easily.
be the first test subject.
Yeah.
I mean, once he's dead, sure, you know.
Well, no, we could just make that happen for the test.
No. Come on. You got to live a nice long life. Connor doesn't care what happens to his body. He's not sacred about that.
Me?
Yeah, you.
No, well, whatever. Why would I care though? Why would I
That's what
ever?
I'm saying. You wouldn't care. You already said that if you go before me, that I can keep your body and stick you in the freezer or whatever.
Yeah, you could. Well, you could. Like
Just to
Rowdy
hang
from
out.
Scrubs.
Yeah, just right.
That's
You're gonna
exactly
be like
what I was
Rowdy.
thinking.
Yes.
Get me stuffed.
I'm not saying you're gonna be worried about it. I'm just saying don't speed up the process. You don't got to stick yourself in the catapult for science.
I mean, yeah, it could be. I guess so. I mean, you can though, because at the start you would be alive, but if you get to space, you would be dead anyway. Like it would kill you in the process anyways. So
Right. You want to take the ultimate ride.
yeah, I would feel like 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Yeah, a little bit. Okay. Final line I want to mention from chapter 9, then we'll go into chapter 10.
Okay.
And again, it is similar to what we were saying, but it's shortly after. It's the next page for me on page 69. This really jumped. I just thought it was a really great piece of writing, but also feels like it's connected to the idea of, could this be a dream? Wells writes, for the most part of that night, I was persuaded it was a nightmare. I bit myself and screamed in a passionate desire to awake. I beat the ground with my hands and got up and sat down again and wandered here and there and sat down again. Then I would fall to rubbing my eyes and calling upon God to let me awake. And I just thought this was like a really powerful moment, and I do think it kind of shows some of like the reality of Weena's loss hitting him and like kind of realizing the gravity of like what has occurred in this night. And and also like it's like I guess sort of like his reality in the future. It's like this is so extreme and so vivid. He's kind of going through this episode where he's like, this can't be real. Like, I can't really have time traveled to the year 800,000, whatever. He's like, this is fucking nuts. And just the idea that like he's like imploring God for him to wake up and it'll all be a dream. It's interesting both in the fact that like he kind of comes to question that in the later chapters when he actually is back in the drawing room and talking to the people at the dinner party. He's like, could it have been a dream? Could it have actually been? But like in this moment, it's like Josh was talking about that other idea that Wells references, like the sorrow of a loss in a dream. And he was like, I've felt that before. And Josh, I know what you mean. I've also had dreams where, I'm having a nightmare and I'm trying to wake myself up. And like, it feels like what Wells is trying to describe here. And yet it's like, there's a futility to it because according to the time traveler, he's in a waking nightmare. This is his real life. And it just felt like a really powerful, sad kind of way to also show like kind of the fucked up side of what's happening here. I do think that like in this moment, he's really reeling from Weena's loss and just the experience of traveling so far into the future. It's not just sanitized, distanced, Victorian, stiff upper lip. He has this moment of like complete sort of a
Breakdown.
breakdown. Yeah, a breakdown. Yeah, that's all.
No, you're right. Maybe just a couple hours or a day, how long it's been since I read it. Just kind of, I did read this part. I'm getting the exact same stuff you were getting. Maybe not the later connection of the dream, but yeah, the emotion shown here definitely goes against what we were saying earlier about him being very callous to the whole ordeal in the end. And I guess that callousness just left a better impression.
Yeah, I do think this is worth mentioning, and I think it's a credit to H.G. Wells here. Because, I mean, at the start, I think we were kind of critical on him, especially with his kind of, the initial assessment of the time traveler about how we got to this point in the future. And that has kind of been flipped on its head a little bit. And in the same way, this character of the time traveler, this Victorian man of science with eccentricities, does have these human moments, like where, yeah, he's having a breakdown, loses his shit, of course, like any human would. He's not like a James Bond type, or just like the man who can do it all. Not an infallible action hero. And in the same way, when I think when it shows aggression, I think that also shows a weakness in resolve and self control at times too. So yeah, I think he's like definitely flawed, like purposefully, I think.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that H.G. Wells would have really liked that Hoobastank song, "The Reason," where they sing "I'm not a perfect person." I think that maybe would have been our greatest contribution to him from the future.
Yeah, well, actually, Hoobastank is named after H.G. Wells because H.G. Wells, the first initial H, it stands for Hoobastank. His full name is Hoobastank Graham Wells.
Wow, that's
Yeah,
beautiful. That's a
yeah,
really just a beautiful testimony to the life that he lived.
it is. Yeah, and sometimes history turns out like that. It's poetic, how things play out.
Absolutely. All right. Well, let's get to chapter 10, shall we? Unless
Yeah.
either of you would like to mention anything.
Nope.
No. Okay.
Good thing the next few chapters are short because we still have a lot to talk about.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are. So, chapter 10, he gets to he makes it back to the Sphinx statue. And there's kind of this funny twist where he's fully prepared to break it open, and the Sphinx statue is itself already open, like it's waiting for him. And so he walks. He walks in there, and he finds it to be a kind of humorous situation. But he's like, "Okay, I see what's going on here." Walks in there, seats himself in the time machine, and he's like, "Okay, got a blast. Time to get out of here." But the door closes from the statue, and now it's pitch black, and he's like fumbling around to try to start the time machine up because he has to put the levers back on it, and the Morlocks are there, and the matches that he was going to use are the kind that you have to strike against a matchbox, which are the only matches I've ever used. I don't. Apparently, he has some
Same here. I've
awesome
heard that matches. Yeah, I've seen in like cartoons where like Tom the cat will like or like the coyote will just like scrape a match on a rock or something and it'll light.
That's true.
I tried that so many times at like my grandmother's house with what I thought were older matches, but it never worked.
Yeah, you know what? That's another thing we have to bring back. Just like Tumuli, we need matches that you can just fucking strike on anything. Where are those?
Danger matches, not
Why
the
did
safety
we,
matches.
Why did we get rid of those? Like sometimes you just need a match, and you don't have a matchbox. That's fine. Anyways,
That's cool.
He is able to ultimately figure it out, and um and basically the chapter ends with him, just about to, or like just immediately after he starts time traveling again to escape this situation from the Morlocks. So we don't see where he goes to until the next chapter. But yeah, this chapter he reclaims the time machine. He's in danger. He escapes it with a wild time travel just to get out of Dodge. And chapter's over. We'll talk about where he ends up in the next chapter.
Mm-hmm.
So what about this one here, Josh?
I only had a couple notes or highlights from this chapter. I thought my hasty conclusions upon that evening and could not. Sorry, I thought of my hasty conclusions upon that evening and could not refrain from laughing bitterly at my confidence. Here he is at the throne on the hilltop that he had found on his first day there, and he's made it back from the forest and is looking over the valley where the Eloy that he had originally encountered are still living their lives. He sees the same river where he saved Weena from, and more Eloy bathing there. And he's just reflecting on all these assumptions that he had made that we were definitely tearing into him for during our first podcast. And here he is with all the hindsight, all the experience to know that all of his assumptions were wrong, which, yeah, that they usually are when you do science. Sorry, there's something in my eye.
Yeah.
My next note is something I just really liked. It's just really poetic language here. I grieve to think how brief the dream of the human intellect had been. It had committed suicide. It had set itself steadfastly towards comfort and ease, a balanced society with security and permanency as its watchword. It had attained its hopes to come to this at last. And I think this might be the thesis of the book. And the whole point that made Wells write the book was this is how he saw society when he wrote it, and believed that if they achieved all their goals, then there would be nothing left to drive society and it would wane into something terrible.
Yeah. I definitely want to talk about this a little bit because there's another line I want to read, just going off that, and then I'll
sure.
But on my copy, page 70, which I guess is the first. That's on the first page. You know what? It's like immediately after what you were reading, Josh. He writes, once life and property must have reached almost absolute safety. The rich had been assured of his wealth and comfort, the toiler assured of his life and work. No doubt in that perfect world, there had been no unemployed problem, no social question left unsolved, and a great quiet had followed. So, a quick couple things to add here.
Yeah.
One, it feels like the way he lays that out, I agree with you, Josh, where Wells is thinking about the trajectory of his current society, because it's like, what a line. There had been no unemployed problem. There's probably a lot of unemployment happening in London right now. Like a lot of struggles and a lot of difficulties, like living in this city in 1895. I can imagine. Mm-hmm. And so, like, of course, at this time, like, there's this question of like what the trajectory should be. Should we continue with our current system of monarchy and parliament? There's this whole other idea of communism. Is that worth a shot? Because Wells name drops that before, and yeah, like I think that this book kind of is ultimately a critique of communism, or at least like very skeptical of communism. But I think it's interesting in the way that it does it, because I feel like usually with communist critique, it usually comes from like looking at failed implementations of communism, or implementations of communism that, you know, have been under circumstances that lead to like totalitarianism, you know, or like extreme dictatorships. And it's like, oh, you don't want to have communism because, you know, it's just gonna still lift up, you know, this small amount of people on the top, and you get nothing, and they're gonna fucking kill you. You know what I mean? Like it's a lot of like, not to gloss over very real problems, but a lot of critique I feel like comes from like not a superficial place, but like not at the actual like tenets of communism itself. A lot of communist critique comes from like, oh, look at how they tried to implement it and it fucked up. Not, oh, this is what is inherently wrong with communism and why it'll never work. But I think that that's what Wells is doing here. Wells is imagining a future in which communism went exactly right. Communism went perfectly. They chose communism. Everybody had all their needs met. It created a utopia. I
don't know if they chose communism in this timeline, because we have the upper class that evolved into the Alloy, and then we have the underclass that evolved into the Morlocks.
Okay.
Yeah,
yes,
I think this is very, very much you know, that the time traveler's assumption that this is the inevitable end result of communism. Seeing the Morlocks was that flipped upside down. I think it is a capitalist critique. I mean, I don't think it is a I don't think it is friendly to the idea of communism. I think it is a both sides kind of uh warning here.
Yeah, I think it's meant to be somewhat ambiguous as to what system brought about utopia, as he initially described it. But also remember, like that when he said communism, and we were joking around about that, that was during one of his hasty conclusions that he is laughing at himself for getting so wrong at this point in the chapter in the book. So I don't know. He saw a bunch of communal living places, which we now know to probably be, you know, just like ranches, effectively, for cattle, and just assumed that it was communism. That was the current economy. Sorry, just blanking on words all of a sudden. And so I don't think the thesis here is that communism caused this or that capitalism caused this. It's inequality caused this.
Yeah, I mean, I also think that it's I mean, it's a different read today. Like, you know, I think today I can clearly see the Elon Musk's and the Jeff Bezos of the world, Mark Zuckerberg's of the world, the very tippy toppy elite, and then the 99% being the Morlocks, and then eventually we get to a point where their lifespans are just so much artificially extended, and their health is improved with the help of products and, you know, technology, and we're left to suffer and toil underground. Um, Multiply that by tens of thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years, and what do you get? Um, so I think that it makes sense to me as a potential future. And I mean, you know, it's interesting, obviously, like this coming out in the 1890s or whatever, like Connor mentioned before, like most critiques of communism are like, oh well, the Soviet Union, that didn't work out, huh? Oh well, Mao was a bad guy, huh? And this is before all of that even happened. Like, this is decades before people really tried to do that. And obviously, like, those arguments they're always without the context of, like, you know capitalist countries, imperialist countries. The entire time these communist nations existed, we're just sitting there in the background trying to fuck with them, and so eventually we lead to their denial, their disillusion. Not to say that they are without fault, because that's not true either. But so that's before, like, we even get to all this context where that we're used to seeing being obfuscated. So yeah, it's interesting, because I don't think it's like pro capitalism or pro communism or anti either. I think it is just a warning. I think Josh is right about saying it's like a warning about the consequences of vast inequality in a society. I think during that time there inequality was quite bad, probably. And
Right.
obviously, from a capitalistic standpoint, because that's the world we live in, but it's never really called out by name.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess I mean, I agree. Like, I don't want to be hasty, because you're right. Like, it can't strictly be capitalism when we're talking about, like, the very stark like, class division here. Unless, of course, like, that is itself kind of a communist critique, where it's like, oh well, you fancy yourselves, doing away with that, and yet, like, does it still kind of recreate the haves and have not system? I think that's
Absolutely. No, I
possible.
mean, absolutely. I think that's like an argument that gets thrown around. Like, you're right. Like, it's the inequality remains. There's going to be people at the top that are doing things to benefit themselves. But, like, I guess what I was trying to say is, like, I feel like this is before that argument, like, really takes shape, because it's before these have even been there. There have been real attempts at creating these or seeing these ideologies through. But so yeah, I think it is. I think it is ambiguous
Yeah.
here.
But yeah, well, and I mean, I agree. I do agree with that, and I understand where you're both are coming from. The other thing too, though, excuse me, we were kind of saying, like, previously, oh, with the class division, we have the evil eye up top. They're described as, like, pretty beautiful, and then the Morlocks, who are very much, not only the working class, they've been forced underground to live a life specialized and dedicated only to creating things for the aristocracy, and they're described as, like, disgusting and repugnant, and the main character literally, like, gets joy out of clubbing them over the head and bashing their skull in with a broken lever. Like, that's pretty fucking bold, to lay it all out there like that. And the other thing I wanted to kind of, like, ask you guys is, do you feel like that is given to us as at face value, and Wells really is a stand-in for the time traveler, and he just believes that the Morlocks are a disgusting, repulsive refuge of society? Or is there more of a examination going on, and he's doing this with more intent, than it might seem? How did you feel reading through this? There is no, like, explicit moment where it's like, oh no, the Morlocks, you know, they actually needed to be saved or whatever. Like, even at the very end, the time traveler is like, oh, fuck, get these fucking gross ass fucking things off it. And then, you know, it's like they're always disgusting, repugnant, repulsive things. There's very little sympathy from them, from the time traveler. How do you think that reflects on the views of the author, and what do you get out of that as a reader?
I think there is a moment, and it is a brief moment where the time traveler is like, I like, as hard as I try to have sympathy for these creatures, I just can't.
Mm-hmm.
Like he does think to himself like maybe I should feel bad for these guys. Like if my hypothesis is correct, this is like not their fault. And then and he's thinking about, you know, like what would bring them to, you know, cannibalism or eating the ellie. Is it even still cannibalism at this point? Like um and so he's, I mean, so there is like a tiny battle within. I mean, it is disregarded very fast and you know, in like typical Victorian fashion, but it is mentioned. So I feel like, I don't know. I do feel like Wells is kind of like, well, yeah, but like they're too far gone, so it's like not reasonable to give them sympathy.
Yeah.
Kind of in the same
Like,
way that he seems to posit that the Eloi are so far gone they're not really worth deep affection. Although
yeah,
Lena goes on to
Good point.
kind of disprove that initial assumption that the time traveler has.
I do think the moment that Connor's mentioning, let me see if this is it, because on my copy it's page 72. He says, a sudden thought came into my head as I stooped towards the portal. For once at least, I grasped the mental operations of the Morlocks. Suppressing a strong inclination to laugh, I stepped through the bronze frame and up to the time machine. I was surprised to find it had been carefully oiled and cleaned. I have suspected since that the Morlocks had even partially taken it to pieces while trying in their dim way to grasp its purpose. And I did think, but that was interesting. He says, like, for the first time, I was kind of back and forth as well, where the time traveler is saying for the first time, I felt like I realized what the Morlocks were thinking. But, like,
yeah, that's not the passage I was thinking of, but that
okay.
also does illustrate some contemplation of
Yeah.
their
Mm-hmm.
humanity or whatever.
But there
What's left
is,
of it?
there really is a lot of ambiguity in this book as we continue to discuss it, because I took the line I just read to, like, sort of be one of two things, because he mentions how they like examined and cleaned the time machine, and because of their status as, you know, like these lower class workers who have to focus on like maintaining this machinery underground, they have a predisposition to want to understand technology and machinery. But then it also ends up being a trap where the time traveler goes into the time machine and they shut the door and they seem to try to like grab at him. And so I wasn't sure actually if, when the time traveler says, I understand for the first time what the Morlocks are thinking, if he meant, oh, they took the time machine innocuously and out of this sense of like almost evolutionary curiosity to machinery because of what they've been forced to do. Or, oh, I finally understand them. They took the time machine because they wanted to set me up for a trap because
I
they
don't think it's
wanted
either of
to.
that.
No,
I think it's no, because when I read that, I think you're close with the second one. I think when he says, hang on, I was on the wrong page. As I approached the pedestal of the Sphinx, I found the fuck, where was it?
it's like the second to last page of the chapter, I think.
I'm using my phone though, so it's not a page.
Yeah.
But when he said, God damn it, where is it? Anyway, when he says that he understood how they thought in that moment, I took that to mean like he could see the trap from a mile away, and he could see this very simple, obvious trap of the door that he was going to open is now just suddenly conveniently open for him, and he can see his time machine within. It's clearly a carrot with a hidden stick. So I took it as he is willingly walking into this trap that he can see, and feels that he is the smarter man because he has the fire. He thinks he has the fire with the matches that he can use to dispel the Morlocks. And they obviously don't know that he has that the time machine can just leave. I think he's fully aware that the door is going to close behind him. And I think the first surprise that he has is that the machine had been partially disassembled and reassembled. I think that might be the first real inkling he has that the Morlocks are smarter than they appear. And then the trap springs, and he doesn't have much time to think about that because now the matches don't work.
Right.
So I think you were close to the second one, but I think it's just a slightly... I had a slightly different interpretation of that passage.
Yeah, I see. Okay, interesting. Well, I think that's all I wanted to mention on Chapter 10. Our next ones will be a little quicker. Do you want to add anything, either of you?
My only other highlight was that he mentions this last scramble on the time machine was probably the nearer thing than the fight in the forest, or that it was a closer call.
Yeah,
he did almost lose the lever at one of the levers at one point and had to headbutt Morlock in the dark to get it back. I'm surprised none of the Morlocks went with him when he went into the future. Like there was like one scrambling over him or something that just kind of got caught. There's no real indication of what happens if like your foot is hanging off the time machine when you start it. Like, does your shoe get left behind? Does it get like severed or what?
Yeah.
But I there wasn't enough text in this book to figure out that little nuance of this, which isn't important to the story. It's just a thought I had when I was reading this part. Like, what happened to the Morlocks who were like half on the time machine when it took off? Did they just like stay where they were and fall down? Did they get bifurcated across millennia? What happened?
Yeah. No, I agree.
do.
I sort of half expected one of them to be running around too in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Connor?
Not for long.
I do have to tinkle, so you want to do a tight 2 and then move on?
Sure.
Yeah, we'll take a quick break and then we'll discuss chapters 11, 12, and the epilogue.
Sam.
And then we'll discuss the whole book. Because that's what we do at the end of
Yes,
these. This is going to be a long episode. Buckle up, everybody.
Let's do it.
We'll be all right. like this song more.
What was that?
I like that song more. That was a good choice.
Oh, thanks.
Sometimes you do one that's like really like annoyingly loud. I fucking hate that one.
Do you know what song that is that I just played?
No.
Annoying number 2.
Is that us?
No, because you're playing on that one.
I was gonna say, is that us?
That's us.
It did sound like it was Galactic Static a little bit.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
pretty good. What song is that?
That's Dream Boy.
Oh,
Instrumental.
well, that's good. Look at
Yeah,
that.
sounds pretty good.
That's good right there. That we did that.
Yeah, pretty cool. All right, ready?
Yep.
The annoying one that you don't like is also just me. So thanks a lot.
Yeah,
buddy.
well, I mean, I'm sorry. It's annoying. Don't do that one.
I recorded it because I was gonna try and do a bunch of really generic riffs to sell as stock music, and then I did 2 and got bored and stopped. All right, 3, 2, 1, go.
All right. So I think we're all good to discuss Chapter 11. We find out where the time traveler actually goes after the whole Morlock debacle. The Morlockle, as
Yes,
colloquially.
as it's referred to. I mean, at least in my copy of the book, it's referred to as that.
Right. Yeah, you have that. You have that really old copy.
Yeah. The time traveler is like, I'm in quite the Morlockle. Right
Yeah.
now.
Right. And
And
my
everybody
I had
clapped.
I had a little footnote.
Yeah,
Morlock
exactly.
debacle. Yeah. So yeah. So he escapes in the time machine, and he does so in such a haste of trying to escape the Morlocks that he flings himself like so far into the future, like so much further into the future than he realizes at first. And when he eventually stops the time machine, which he takes even longer to do so because he also thinks about how he was flung from the time machine before. Really interesting how he's considering stopping the time machine like stopping an automobile and like pumping the brakes. Like you can't come to a dead stop at 100 miles an hour, you know? And yet like he's measuring that distance through time, of course. I think that's like a really cool detail in terms of how the time machine functions. So the time traveler comes to this almost alien seeming landscape, even though of course he knows he's technically in the same place still on Earth. And he's on this shore, and he makes all of these realizations of like just noting how, you know, just observing the landscape and the sky. He's like, oh, you know, the Earth is now like orbitably locked with the sun, just like how the moon is locked.
Tidally locked. Yep.
Yeah, tidally. Thank you. Tidally locked. So the Earth is in the same position as the moon is relative to itself now. I don't know if I explained that right. I promise you, I'm not fucked up. I'm just not sure how to say it. Josh can do a much better job than me. He'll get to talk about it. And that, you know, we see the crabs. We do see the crabs. Shout out to the crabs. We'll talk about them. But a lot of this chapter really just covers like the far, far, far future, and like all of the things that the time traveler observes. And he kind of mentions like, oh yeah, like I could have gone back right away, but you know, he's almost fatally curious about the fate of the planet now, like the fate of Earth. He's like wondering like, wow, like I can kind of solve this mystery. Like, what is it? But it doesn't ever quite get to him discovering the ultimate fate of the planet, because as he kind of does these shorter jumps into the future to try to figure that out, the planet becomes more and more inhospitable to him. And at his like final jump, he's about to lose consciousness, and he's like, oh shit, I have to leave, of course, and so he just barely makes it back to the time machine, and sends himself back in time to return to his own time, and that's where our chapter ends. Josh, you and I remember the crabs. I have to also just kind of admit outright, you were way more correct in terms of the size of the crabs. I literally said they were skyscraper-sized crabs.
You were a little drunk at the time, but yeah, I remember them being, at most car size. But he points out like a coffee table or something, so they're coffee table sized crabs.
Yeah.
Yeah, those were like two of my my highlights for this chapter. Whereas like I saw these things that were really monstrous crab-like creatures because everything evolves into crabs eventually.
Right.
And I guess
Wells
I didn't
Wells
highlight
is right about that one.
the size.
Yeah, but you're right about the table like comparison, which is still. I mean, think about a coffee table and think about a crab. I mean,
it's the one in my living room is huge.
Right, it's
Bigger
still
than
effectively a man-sized crab, just not as tall. I mean, but like
I mean,
in terms of
one of them was, yeah, one of them was big enough to like sneak up behind him and like, I don't know, feel him with his face tentacles or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, no, they are still quite massive for crabs, but not quite as big as I thought they were. That's you can't rely on your memory. It just goes to show. Connor.
Well, it's like when you were a kid, it's like buildings seemed bigger, your parents were
Right.
like giants. It's like the same thing when you read something when you're younger. You just
Yeah.
like I'm sure when you read this originally, you thought that Weena was like 10 feet tall.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I read this book. I was like, wait a minute, a table-sized crab? That must be the size of a skyscraper.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
I was happy to get to the crabs because that was a little nice teaser that I got last week.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No, it's okay. I mean, I don't know, it wasn't a spoiler. I don't consider that a spoiler. But I wasn't expecting them to be in the far I thought they would be something of that time that we were in. So I didn't expect to go farther in the future. That was a nice surprise to me. And I liked how it was portrayed, especially like the change in the air, and difficulty breathing, and I don't know. It reminds me of the quote in the Doctor Who episode Boom from last season, written by Mr. Stephen Moffat. Everywhere is a beach eventually.
Nice.
Yeah.
I love these Doctor Who references. I'll say one quick thing and I'll pass it over to Josh, because you were saying about how like you like the description of like the landscape and everything, and I really want to second that. My big thing was like, when we were reading Lord of the Rings, sometimes like these overlong sort of descriptions of a place can feel like they drag on and are kind of boring. But I think Wells actually really has a knack for it, because that's almost what this whole chapter is. But I found it to be very interesting. And of course, there's a case to be made for like, does it have to do with the difference between describing an alien landscape and a familiar landscape? I'm sure that's part of it. So I'm not trying to knock Tolkien. Part of Tolkien is that he wants to bring the wonder back to the real life, like to bring magic back into reality. And so it's like, I think there's something there that Tolkien is trying to do similar descriptions sometimes in order to make what feels very familiar actually seem as magical as it like truly is, but I don't want to get caught up in that. I just want to say I really like the description of the sky here, because the earth is tidally locked to the sun, and so you don't get a sunrise or a sunset, and in fact there's like this like gradient to the hue of the sky, and on one end it's like pitch black, and as you get closer to the sun, you know, you get this like bright, brilliant red, and in the middle is like this like a very dull sort of you know, mixture between the two. And I really felt like from that description I could plant myself in those shoes and almost feel like I was looking around like one of those stupid videos where it's meant to seem like it's first person, like it's virtual reality or something. And I was like, I could imagine the sky like really vividly, and I thought that was a great detail that I want to shout out. Josh, how do you feel about all this?
Um, it was greener than I remember. I remember things being very Mars-like in the description, where everything's kind of red. I forgot it was the description of the ocean being like super still, and he described it as oily, which made a lot of sense to me. Uh, Maybe not have been so still because it's not just tidal forces that cause waves, but a lot has uh, a lot of time has passed, so perhaps a lot of those wave generating processes just died down. Um, the the fact that the sun is on the horizon this whole time is actually, I don't know if it's Wells did it on purpose, but the when the Earth becomes when a planet becomes tidally locked with its star, the face of the planet that faces the star basically boils, and the far side of the planet freezes, and there's this narrow band in between at the twilight zone that would be habitable. So he just happened to land in this perpetual twilight that would be the habitable portion of Earth in this period when it would be tidally locked. The time frame for when that happens may not be entirely accurate. The description of the inner planet causing an eclipse while he's there also probably would never happen, because in a million years, like literally a million years, however far he is in the future, it's like the planets won't shift nearly that far, and Mercury and Venus are obviously going to fall into, I shouldn't say obviously, but are more likely going to fall into the sun instead of migrating out to a point where they could eclipse the star enough to be cast a visible shadow on the Earth. The moon disappearing is still accurate. It is slowly moving away from the Earth and would eventually no longer be orbiting the Earth at some point. But I mean, maybe the moon's what causes the eclipse, but then again, it would be so far away that it shouldn't be causing an eclipse, especially if the sun is inflated and bigger than it is today. But yeah, I said it was greener than I remembered, because he's describing all this like moss and lichen and plant life, not like leafy trees and stuff like that, but like I said, moss and lichen, like the stuff that grows in caves. That is present on almost every surface that isn't underwater or exposed to shadow, or not exposed to sunlight, rather. It's even on some of the crabs, and I thought that was an interesting detail. The only other thing I want to say is the tidally locked aspect. He called everything is super still. It should probably be extremely windy, because you have a huge temperature gradient between the sunny side and the dark side. And when you have a huge temperature gradient in air, that's how you get wind, and that would be causing a lot of waves on the oceans. So that may not be the best prediction scientifically, but still a pretty good one for 1985.
Interesting. Does that mean that it's projected that Earth will become tidally locked with the sun? Or that's possible?
I think it would be. It's possible. I don't know the time frame for that. I don't know the exact mechanics of tidal forces. I think the Earth will become tidally locked with the moon first. If the moon doesn't leave Earth's orbit before that happens. But the amount of time it would take for the Earth to become tidally locked to the sun would probably be on the order of billions of years.
I see.
Which is also roughly the time frame that the sun has left remaining before it explodes. So, or otherwise dies. I don't know if it explodes or not. The science has changed a lot, even in our lifetimes, actually. Stuff that I learned reading, like, the Space Encyclopedia that I still have on my bookshelf, doesn't actually hold up anymore to newer observations.
Yeah, I still think that there's room for Wells to be proven more right than wrong. He got the crab thing right.
Things are not moving in haven't moved in Wells's direction in our lifetime. Let's put it that way.
All right. And for the record, the time frame here, I think that Wells writes this is meant to be 30 million years into the future.
Yeah,
It's still like not that far on a cosmic time scale. I get that, but
yep.
Yeah, to the
more than 30 million years hence.
Yeah.
For context, that is less time has passed between the end of the dinosaurs and today.
Right. Yes. Yep.
So that just gives you an idea of like how much can change in that amount of time, I guess.
Absolutely. Right. And like, would it have made more sense for him to set it further in the future, even based off of 1895 science? I wonder,
Maybe. Honestly, I see that as when I was remembering this before we read the book, I was thinking it was in the billions of years in the future.
Yeah.
I think the Earth is only supposed to be habitable to life as we currently know it for another billion years or so. So setting this portion of the book, 100 times further out than it currently is, or no, 30 million, so maybe 50 times further out than what it is now, might have been a better choice, but that's just he wouldn't have any way of knowing that. So
yeah, although I guess I do sort of wonder because like I think it's during the epilogue, not to get ahead of ourselves, but like when they're imagining like where might the time traveler be, they discuss like different periods in the past. It's like, oh, could it be the Triassic or the Jurassic or the Neolithic, or and so it's clear that a lot of these terms and a lot of these eras had already been identified and categorized. So it's like if Wells had an understanding of the vast amount of time, that was between these eras in the past, maybe it still would have been like more logical to extrapolate that and apply it to his future projections. Like, I think maybe he did have the information there and just, obviously took his best crack at it, like that. I think he's doing his best. I'm not trying to criticize him, but I think that like he had the information to pull from already and just like kind of whiffed it a bit, maybe.
Sorry, you mentioned the Triassic, and for some reason got me thinking. The whole Mesozoic era is longer than the period this book is set in, and in fact, all three parts of the Mesozoic era, the Triassic, the Jurassic, and the Cretaceous, are longer than 30 million years. So this whole book could have taken place in any one of these time periods, and would have been completely contained within them.
Right.
So just to help you understand just how much time Earth has existed and will continue to exist, and how much changes in that time period. Like we have entire geological eras that this entire book would be contained in, and he's describing things that will happen theoretically, but they occur on time scales just orders of magnitude larger than what he put in.
Right. It kind of makes me wonder if, even though they had these eras defined, it's like, were
They probably didn't have...
Was the time correct?
Maybe not, because a lot of that probably came from radioactive dating, and the radioactive decay of uranium has been a big proponent of how we know the Earth is 4.6 billion years old now. Hey, if you ever if you ever talk to people who say the Earth is only 6,000 years old, ask them to explain lead, because we only have as much lead as we do because uranium has been decaying for 4 billion years.
I see. Yeah, so it's like maybe a lot of the evidence and the information was there, but like the assumed time periods for how long those eras lasted, potentially could have been much shorter than what the science tells us now, right? And maybe that could account for...
Yeah, probably.
That could maybe account for like how Wells takes that information and applies it to his future projections, or maybe not, because we're just having a conversation and not looking any of this up. As the time traveler says, actually, I have this line here. As the time traveler says, wait a minute, I just said I had this line. Jeez. I was like setting myself up to have this cool little quip. He mentioned something about being as wrong as like the mental capacity of a human allows at some point, and which I wanted to bring up because we talked about the time traveler being wrong about a lot of things. Yep. I'll come back to it. Who cares? Josh, any other notes on this chapter 11?
We talked about the work of tidal drag was done. The crabs, 30 million years, the transit, the stillness of it all. So actually, I do have two notes that we didn't really cover.
Can I first off say, I know I just asked you, and that I don't mean to interrupt.
Yeah,
it's only because in my notes I found the line. The line was, it may be as wrong an explanation as mortal wit could invent. That's what I was looking for. That was from chapter 10.
Okay.
That's a good one.
That's it. It's only because phrasing. It's only right. That's when he's making his projections about, like, we were talking about, is it capitalism? Is it communism? How did we get here? The time traveler kind of goes back and thinks like, this is still how I think it happened between the Morlocks and the Eloi and the class division. And he pretty much lays it all out there again. But then he says it may be as wrong an explanation as mortal wit could invent. And I was trying to bring it up humorously here, but just since I'm talking about it, it's because, like, we talk about how the time traveler has been wrong about so many things. I thought it was cool that towards the end of the book, he seems to finally fully admit, that he might not know fucking anything, and he's just doing his best. That's all.
Yep.
All right, Josh, those two notes there for chapter
11. So first two notes. It wasn't just crabs that were in this time period. There was a huge white butterfly that goes slanting and fluttering up into the sky with a harsh scream.
Yeah, that was really cool and unexpected for me.
Yeah, which it's definitely a very sci-fi, like, it's a giant bug. Again, doesn't really work with this rarefied atmosphere that he's also writing about, because we have had giant bugs, but that was when oxygen levels were like twice what they are today. So I don't think it's possible it's not an insect. It's just something that evolved to look like a butterfly. Probably more of that, but.
And the other thing that you're not accounting for, Josh, notably, the moon is absent at this point in time.
Yep.
Right. And if the moon's an egg,
fuck.
I mean, we all know.
Not expecting that.
We all know what comes out of the moon, right, guys?
Yeah. If the moon's an egg, that butterfly. If the moon's an egg, that butterfly is the Zarbi.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
All right, Josh. Sorry.
So the other note is going back to the silence.
Wait, the
This
silence? The question will be asked? Trenzalord?
Thank you, Connor.
Thank
Everyone was
you.
thinking it.
But I really like the way this line was written. Silent, it would be hard to convey the stillness of it. All the sounds of man, the bleating of sheep, the cries of birds, the hum of insects, the stir that makes the background of our lives, all that was over.
Yeah. Excellent line.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those noisy bird circles.
Yeah, definitely. It's like it is, I don't know. I like it because it just draws attention to exactly as he says, like the background hum, and like just consider how much stronger that hum is today. The further you go on throughout history, it's like the hum only gets louder, but it still only ever remains a hum at the same time. But I love this idea of like the absence of it all.
Yep.
Yes.
Agreed.
Connor, was I missing anything from you that you wanted to discuss here in chapter 9? Or sorry,
Yeah.
I fucked that one up. Chapter 11.
No, I mean, I just thought it was very interesting, especially like the I was very taken with like the screech of the butterfly creature, or and just thinking about, I mean, how like, you know, sounds only a dog can hear, or how insects or small animals hear our voices and stuff. I was thinking about like how far in the future, like what the difference is in like pitch and tone and frequencies that these animals
With
are
a
have evolved to hear and produce. And I don't know, it was just
if
it
it
was
really is a rarefied
interesting.
atmosphere, then yeah, higher pitches would be carrying further. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That so I don't know, just an interesting little detail that I appreciated.
Yeah, it's cool. I'd just like to add, I thought it was really cool that Wells goes further into the future from the future that he initially imagines.
Mm-hmm.
This was something that I remembered was going to happen, but I thought it was a cool, like, not even raising of it's not the like the stakes are raised, but it's like, you know,
He
just to
draws it out
take.
to a further conclusion.
Yes, yeah, he takes the concept further. Like, it feels like, he could just as easily have sort of left it as the main focus. I mean, the main focus is on the whole Eloi and the Morlock still, but like the story like really could have been left at that, I feel like, and you wouldn't like lose too much. You could still ultimately tell pretty much the same story. But I think it's really cool that when he's escaping the Morlocks, he goes further into the future instead of, back in time to like quote unquote safety. And I
He
just
tried to go back at first. He just hit the wrong lever.
right, yeah, just like Yzma from The Emperor's New Groove.
Wrong lever. No, Kronk hit the wrong lever.
Yeah, you're right, like Kronk. Yeah, dude, the time traveler is such a Kronk. But yeah, I mean, and yeah, it's like so far into the future where the influence of humanity is even detectable. It's like with the Eloi and the Morlocks. At first, it seems very alien and removed, and then he comes to this conclusion, whether it's right or wrong, like, oh well, they must be offshoots of humanity, but it's like now there's nothing left, and Josh was bringing up this whole carcinization or whatever, everything becomes a
Yep.
crab. I mean, it is funny to think, like, what if the Morlocks became the crabs? It's like, I don't fucking know. Maybe. But obviously that's
Not in 30 million years, but maybe.
You're right. Obviously that's not the point. The point is, to show that there is more time and there is more story. There is more everything beyond, the Eloi and the Morlocks. I think that Wells is trying to show that even though the bulk of the story focuses on the Eloi and the Morlocks in terms of traveling to the future, he also wants to add this quick but impactful further venture into the future to be like, you know, but time is so much grander than this, you know, and the time traveler only briefly experiences this one thin slice, somewhat haphazardly and randomly, and that, like, you know, there's an impossible infinite number of stops along that fourth dimension, and like it still ends with ambiguity, just like so many other things in this book, because the time traveler initially goes to this future inadvertently, but then ultimately, you know, they take these short, quick stops into the future, 1,000 years here, 1,000 years there, because they're like, well, now I'm invested. Now I want to see like what's going to happen to Earth. But again, like he's forced to go back because it's too dangerous for him to be there. And so you don't get to even see what that ultimate fate is. And I think it's like very smart, because it makes sense logically that the time traveler, of course, can't exist on the planet when it's close to its demise, whether it's thousands of years or millions of years close or whatever, you know. But also, like, for the story and for the reader, it makes the book feel that much more legitimate, I think, because you don't get an answer. It makes more sense that these questions are not answered, and makes the book, I think, feel that much more timeless, because you know, Wells is saying that he doesn't have the answer to posit to you, even with a time machine, and I think that's pretty cool. Yeah. All right, shall we talk about our last chapter and then move into the brief epilogue?
Sure. I do want to ask one question, though.
Yes, please do.
Why do you think the crabs were the only parts that we remembered of this part of the book?
Dude. I don't know.
What is it about the giant crabs that just stands out over a decade later?
It's a good question, because they take up such...
Literally like 2 pages.
Right, like such a like they don't matter. It would make so much more sense. And I did remember the Eloi and the Morlocks, but I didn't remember Weena specifically. I didn't remember their dynamic.
I thought she was named Lena. I said that in the first book,
right,
or episode of the podcast.
I actually did think the crabs was going to be more important, to be honest. I thought there was kind of like this whole latter half of like, oh, maybe 50% of the future here, 50% of the future there. But it's really like
That's
95-5, you know?
I was like so surprised at how minimal the crabs featured when we got to them, because of how you guys were talking them up last week.
It's like, is it the crabs? Where's the crabs?
I was like, oh, okay, I guess they're...
Yeah, no, they really are a non sequitur, and I kind of remember that being the case. It's just like, there's this non sequitur in the time machine about giant fucking crabs in the distant future. But yeah, I don't know why that was so like ingrained in my memory of the story.
Yeah,
I think
why is it so impactful.
Going back to, you know, when you're kids, and I know you guys were maybe not kids when you read this book, but it's like crabs are pretty cool, you know. Crabs are cool, like they're a crab monster. That's a cool thing that sticks in your head, you know. And then you guys are like, whoa, holy shit, fucking cool big crabs from the future. And that just sticks with you because you think it's so cool.
I don't know. I mean, you're not wrong. The other thing is, I think that the crabs are kind of representative of... It almost feels like the time traveler goes beyond the scope of the book. Like, in my mind, not to be too dramatic about it, but I feel like the book itself is like the Eloi and the Morlocks. And like it's like the time traveler like goes beyond the limits of like the narrative, and he's suddenly in this like impossibly far future. And like, yeah, I didn't remember all the tiny little details of what the Earth was like at that time, but I think the crabs are kind of like, you know, like I don't know, like the ultimate alien beyond of Earth.
Bug-eyed monsters.
Yeah. So I think that's why it's there. But it's a good question. It's like, yeah, why the crabs? I don't know. They're just cool. Maybe Connor's right. They're just cool.
Maybe.
All right, last chapter. Of course, there's the epilogue, but the epilogue's about a page long. We'll talk about them separately, but we can go back and forth here. So the last chapter, the time traveler describes his journey backwards in time. And it's a very, like, we talk about how Wells kind of creates the like contemporary language for time travel. The detail of him recollecting, like, oh, you remember when I told you about when I was going forwards in time and it seemed like this person was speeding up? Well, now they did the exact same thing in like hyper reverse. And I'm like, yeah, that's perfect time travel, like visual language. That's exactly how you would depict that today in film. So hats off to Wells. Exactly right.
Yep.
He goes backwards in time. He recounts up to exactly when he returns to the dinner party. He's like, so I stopped the machine here. I got out. I could have fallen asleep right in the laboratory, but I smelled the food. I came out to, like he says everything up to the point where he goes and, now I'm telling you the story. So we get the full description of events. And as he finishes telling the story to his dinner party guests in the drawing room, he's pretty much like, and there you have it. You might take it as me telling you the truth. You might take it as a story. But that's what I experienced. And the chapter ends with like everyone who was present pretty much dismissing the time traveler except for the writer of the story, the narrator. And he comes.
The medical man was also somewhat accepting.
You're right.
But yeah, it's
flowers.
Yeah.
But the narrator returns, and because he wants to find out more and to see if it's legit, and he meets the time traveler as he's seemingly preparing to go on another venture. He has a camera this time, and a couple other odds and ends, and he goes into the other room, and the machine vanishes, but importantly, behind closed doors still. But when the narrator opens the door, the time traveler and the machine are gone. And the time traveler says, hey, I'll be right back. You only got to wait 30 minutes. And the huge...
He had a camera this time.
He had a camera this time. And the huge twist is that he doesn't return. And at the point of the narrator writing the story down, it's been 3 years since his final voyage. Or his last known
when he embarked on it
appearance, right? That is precisely where it ends and where it leads into the epilogue. Should I mention the epilogue and just discuss this as like one big thing? Because it feels
we probably should, yeah.
Right. And then the epilogue kind of goes over the narrator discussing like, where could the time traveler be? It's been 3 years. Could the time traveler have gone to these different ages in the past, like I brought up earlier? Or could the time traveler have gone to the future, into whatever, into a more like reasonably close future, to try to like find out what, the advancement of humanity has actually been like, instead of skipping straight over it. And then the chapter sort of ends on this note of mentioning the flowers again, which I'll want to come back to in greater detail. But it I think it ends on like a very sentimental, reflective kind of note. So this whole ending here, Connor, you want to tell us what you thought about finishing up these final chapters of the Time Machine?
Yeah, I mean, I like how it ends. I you know I was thinking when what you know when it said he appeared in his lab again, I was like well, that doesn't make sense because the time machine itself moved in space while he was in the future. So wouldn't it be in a different place? But then they explain that
It's
it's
the
up against the
exact.
wall.
That's one
Yeah,
of my only
it's
highlights in this chapter. Is like, yeah, the distance from where I started to where I ended is the exact distance from where I landed to where the Sphinx
exactly.
was. Which
Yeah,
also
so
makes
I
me
thought
wonder
that
how big
was
was his lab.
Yeah.
well. Yeah, how big is his lab and how close was the Sphinx? Like,
Yeah.
because it must. I mean, it must be a big lab then, I guess. But that
Hmm.
that was very cool. I was happy that they included that.
Yeah, it's a cool detail.
And yeah, the reactions to the story were pretty believable. And yeah, I like how the medical man's like, "Oh yeah, you're overworked.
Yeah.
get get some rest." Uh, and then yeah, I I also just wanted to know, like, when he goes into the lab and he's like, "Hey, wait for me," and then the guy's he like runs in. He's like, "Wait, no, I have an appointment with the guy, Richard or something, a
Yeah.
guy named Richard I'm meeting." Um, and then he runs in, and I think he sees it kind of as it's
Yeah,
disappearing.
he does. Yeah.
Yeah, which is so that to me, that's kind of like his proof, I guess, at least of being able to make a machine that makes you disappear, at least, and yeah, they mention also like the fates of the men at the dinner party, which I thought was sad and um also, I guess, realistic for the 1800s, um but also that like they like some of them might as well have disappeared, just given that they're not in touch anymore. Their lives have changed so much. And then yeah, it's very fitting that the time traveler leaves and does not come back, and you're just left to wonder. I think that's the perfect note to end on.
Hmm.
Yeah, my headcanon is that the time traveler actually is the doctor. And this is like
His
his
origin story.
his first voyage, yeah, from after he leaves Gallifrey.
Well, if you watch the Peter Cushing movie, which I've actually never watched the movies, I
Maybe we gotta watch that too. Yeah.
yeah, I think we should. But he in that movie, the Doctor is not Gallifreyan. He is a human, and he builds the TARDIS himself. Um,
Oh wow, that's really different.
yeah, so uh, I don't know that. So maybe it is. Maybe it.
Even more
Yeah,
evidence into the Peter Cushing theory. We
exactly. Yeah,
maybe we gotta do a double feature. Maybe we should watch that.
that
That'd
would
be
be
cool.
fun. Yeah, I've heard it's pretty good. For it was popular in the '60s.
Yeah. Well, we've had a lot of Doctor Who talk here. Who knows? Maybe soon it'll be Star Wars. I don't know.
Uh huh. Maybe so.
Josh, what say you about these final chapters here?
Um, bit bittersweet. Um, I'm just looking at my notes again. I covered the laboratory thing. It really does wrap things up nicely, and I really like this line on what my notes are now telling me is page 96. Uh, treat my assertion of its truth as a mere stroke of art to enhance its interest, and taking it as a story. What do you think of it?
Yeah.
Like even the time traveler is aware that what he's told is very unbelievable, and it's like, well, believe it if you want, but this is the story I've told, and I'm going to stick by it.
Can I mention something about that line?
Yeah.
Because that was like a really singular line to me. Just because, like, there's a couple things that happen in this chapter and in the end of the story here that play with the idea of, like, is it a dream? Is it reality? And the fact that the character of the time traveler literally says the line, taking it as a story, what do you think? I really love that Wells, like, literalizes this because, you know, it really pushes this concept of, like, whether the time traveler's experience and his recounting of his experience is a dream or not. There's like a very real there is also like a very real experience of, like, having listened to or, like, experienced, not to keep using the same word, or having experienced a story. And so I feel like this story of the time machine kind of ends with, like, whether it was real or not, you read the book, the reader. Don't get hung up on the question of, is this a true recounting or not? You should be, as the reader, considering and reflecting on, what do you get out of having read the story? How are you different from having read the time machine? And I think that, like, Wells really, explicitly tries to ask that question to the reader in a really interesting way, in a way that doesn't just circumvent the whole, like, oh, is it a dream or not? Like, I think Wells is asking the much deeper question of, like, if you're only going to, like, seriously engage with things that are quote unquote real, it means you're dismissing the value of dreams. And if a story is like a dream that, people choose to construct, you're doing yourself a disservice by not considering the ways in which it might impact your real life, the ways in which dreams and stories do. So I really, really love this line because it feels like Wells is, like, very direct about it, and pretty much just saying, don't worry about if it's a dream or if it's reality. Worry about if it has changed or moved you in some way.
Great way of looking at it.
Yeah.
I think there's only two other things I really want to mention about these last chapters before going over the whole book itself.
Yeah.
The first being, I think the narrator, the writer, may have caused the time traveler to disappear. Because towards the end of the chapter, when he goes into the laboratory, he actually sees the machine standing there. And I stand for a minute at the time machine and put out my hand and touched the lever. At that, the squat, substantial-looking machine swayed like a bough shaken in the wind. Its instability startled me extremely, and I had a queer reminiscence of the childish days when I used to be forbidden to meddle. I came back through the corridor. The time traveler met me there in the smoking room. And it's like that passage right there is like, he touched the time machine. He messed with the controls on the time machine, and it wobbled or something.
Yeah.
So I think he may have fucked it up somehow. And when the time traveler goes off saying he'll be back in like half an hour, there was he heard an exclamation oddly truncated at the end, and a click and a thud. A gust of air whirled around me as I opened the door, and From within came the sound of broken glass falling on the floor. So I get the impression something went wrong with this journey.
Yeah, good point. I didn't think about that at all, but
No, either.
I think you're spot on.
Yeah, I think he could have doomed the time traveler unwittingly.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Or he just got sent somewhere he wasn't expecting and got stranded.
Yeah. What do you guys think the likeliest scenario for where he ended up is? Or what happened to
Not
him? Why he
Victorian
can't get
England.
back? Yes, that's
So
true.
I think there's this crystalline part of the time machine that's barely mentioned, but for some reason it sticks in my head. It's like this quartz bar, and I think that may be what broke it here. Because it, like I said, sound of shattered glass. I think maybe it got loosened by whatever meddling the writer did, and I think that's what we hear shattering as the time machine travels off wherever. But if this part is essential for the machine to move through time, then I don't know how it could continue on without the part there anymore. Um, I could also be making this up. I don't know. This is kind of headcanon stuff at this point.
Well,
Speculation.
I do think that when the narrator opens the door, the sound of shattering glass is like I think a window. Like
I think there is, yeah.
Right, a sky window or so, like literally shatters. But I think it goes back to your like really good observation where it's like, well, if the time traveler messed something up, wouldn't that account for? Or sorry, if the narrator messed something up, wouldn't that account for the window breaking potentially? Because nothing like that happened on the initial voyage.
Yep.
And not to say that you are wrong about the quartz bar thing. Obviously, you could just as well be right. But I think that
I could be making that up.
I think you have a really keen like observation on the narrator like maybe being responsible for the time traveler's absence, you know, over all this time. It could just be.
Yeah.
I think he probably ran into a wall or something.
I mean, that's possible too.
That's the most likeliest
Yeah.
scenario in my head.
Scattered across the eons.
It could. I
Yeah.
mean, it does seem like that is most likely because the first time he time travels, he's like, "Oh, if I stop and I stop
Inside
somewhere,
something.
right inside something, isn't that more likely than not?" You know.
I think eventually
Possibly,
your luck would run out. Yeah, you're gonna be screwed.
But I think there's got to be some like anchored. It's got to be like connected to the ground at some way, because if the time traveler, if it just traveled in the same place in absolute space, the Earth would not be there. He would simply like pass through the Earth and be in a completely different spot the second he turned it on. But since it holds still on the planet, there's obviously some movement through absolute space, even though he is staying in the same relative space in Earth's frame of reference.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that, but you're totally right.
Meow.
You can hear that?
Heard that one, yeah.
Oh my god, Sage. What a fat ass. Just meowing outside the door. It's hilarious that you can hear her, but not the new air conditioner. That's really funny to me. Anyways, I'm going to quickly go through some notes here, and then we can talk about our general thoughts on the book.
And provide our ratings.
And
we do at the end of our books.
Yes, we do. We will provide our ratings. I think I know what I'm going to do. We'll see. So, a couple small things. This was another footnote from my book, page 78. One of the things that the time traveler notes about like knowing they're back in the right time is they look at this newspaper. It's called the Pall Mall Gazette. There's a little footnote there here. It says It's a London newspaper to which Wells contributed articles. So,
Oh,
kind of a cheeky reference on Wells's part to name drop
yeah.
this because apparently he wrote for the very paper. And honestly, the only thing we didn't touch on that I really want to mention. Okay, this also comes from a footnote in my book, but it's one that I don't understand. And okay, I have this edition where so some of the footnotes come at the bottom of the page, right?
Yep.
You can read it right there. Some of them are just numbers, and as you go to the back of the book, it'll be like, oh, in chapter 4, number 2 refers to this. So there's two different kinds of footnotes, and I haven't read
That's annoying.
through. Yes. Well, yes and no. I think they do it because some information they recognize will benefit you when you're reading it currently, and some information would be a spoiler, effectively. So,
Okay.
so any of the information in the bigger footnotes in the separate section of the book I've not read. The reason I'm prefacing this is because there's a crazy footnote here that I want to see if you can make heads or tails of, either of you.
Go for it.
I also think I have to let my cat in. Jesus.
Yeah, I can hear her.
Come in,
I want to know what she has to say about this chapter.
Okay. She's in here. Sorry about that. All right. What page is this on? 78. Okay. Hey, you're supposed to be more quiet now that you're in here. Sorry.
Let her talk.
No.
Let her cook.
No, she doesn't. She doesn't have a platform on this. Okay. So this has to do with the time traveler is going back in time, as I've already kind of mentioned. And here's the line, and then I'll read the footnote. It says, the door at the lower end opened, and she glided quietly up the laboratory, back foremost, and disappeared behind the door by which she had previously entered, referring to the person that I had mentioned previously,
Yep.
going backwards.
The maid or whatever.
Yes. Immediately after that, it says, just before that, I seemed to see Hillier for a moment, but he passed like a flash. And then there's this little asterisk next to the name Hillier, and at the bottom of the page it says this: the narrator. The time traveler sees him on his way back, but what he is actually seeing is the moment when he departs on his second journey.
Huh.
Could you repeat that?
Yeah. Okay, so when the text is referring to seeing Hillier for a moment,
Probably
it says,
Hillier being the narrator, most likely.
The narrator, right? Who is never named in the actual text. So I'm not sure how this footnote is like, oh, Hillier is the narrator, but I'm just taking it at its word.
Yep.
It says, the narrator. The time traveler sees him on his way back, but what he is actually seeing is the moment when he departs on his second journey. Oh, right?
That makes sense.
Yeah, he says appears like a flash, so he thinks he sees Hillier, which the note is saying is the narrator. It's just stating the narrator. Hillier is the narrator. But what it's saying is that he's witnessing himself enter the time machine for a second time with the camera gear and all that and disappear.
Right, and Hillier's coming in to like fiddle with the machine.
It could be that,
right?
As well. Yeah, a bit of both of that, because I mean that whole scene takes place over like a minute or two. Which if he's going backwards at 10 hours per second, or whatever, how the fuck you would measure that, it would see like a flash, like, oh, he probably recognized Hilliard's face in the flash, and then most of the movement could have been himself. And since his machine is in a different space, different position in space, then there's no chance of them, colliding as they head off in two different directions.
Yeah.
I wonder if he, by moving the machine back to where he started the original time, if that would have caused him to collide with himself. But then there's that whole paradox of that would be him going out for the first time as well. I don't think H.G. Wells wanted to deal with any of the paradoxes that we have come to know with time travel. And the footnote seems to imply that this is a fixed timeline. It's not like any of the more loose timelines or alternate reality options for time travel. Sounds very much like everything is predetermined, and the time traveler
Connor,
is seeing
to put
things
it
as they
to
occur.
put it in terms Connor can understand. Connor, this is like the Doctor's death on Lake Silencio when the astronaut shoots him.
It's a fixed point.
It's a fixed point in time. Can't get out of it.
Yeah, although I don't really understand how. I don't remember how he gets out of it. It's like he has a weird half regeneration or something. But
No,
No,
that's the robot stand-in.
oh, it is okay.
He hides in a big robot version of himself.
Oh wow, that's kind of stupid, isn't it?
Yeah.
When you say it like that, yeah.
Spoilers, sweetie. All right. I only have one more note on the epilogue I want to mention, and then I'll truly be done, and we can get to our final thoughts. Unless
I also have one note, but I have a guess on what it's going to be. Is it the last sentence?
Yeah, Josh, you got me. Do you want to read it?
No, you go ahead. You were going to read it first.
Okay. So yeah, it ends like this. And I have by me for my comfort 2 strange white flowers, shriveled now and brown and flat and brittle, to witness that even when mind and strength had gone, gratitude and a mutual tenderness still lived on in the heart of man. Josh, do you want to share your thoughts on that first?
Sure, why not? My thoughts on this were kind of I don't know if I really had real concrete thoughts on this. I just knew this was a really well said line, and it's kind of one of the other themes of this book. That even though humanity has fallen so far in the time of the Eloi and the Morlocks, there are still traits of humanity that remain.
Yes.
Namely the tenderness and gratitude. Even if Weena didn't fully understand the depths that the time traveler could understand of these emotions and others, the fact that they still existed was very human of her.
Yeah.
I think that's all I can really say on it.
For not having concrete thoughts, I think those thoughts are pretty damn concrete, Josh. So, this was the line I wanted to come back to when talking about, like, oh, is Weena's loss kind of, I don't know, inconsequential or brushed under the rug? There's a couple other moments that we might have glossed over, or whatever. When the time traveler is sort of reflecting on Weena, which we sort of mentioned too. But I think it's really important that the book itself ends with this mention of the flowers, which of course is like very representative of Weena. That's exactly like Josh is saying what the line's referring to, where, even if humanity at this time, they don't have their strength, they don't have their intelligence, it's sort of like this showcase for the, like even when everything else is gone, like it sort of feels like a distillation of what humanity is, I think. And Wells is saying, like, humanity is not the capacity for intelligence, and humanity is not like the strength of an individual. Humanity is the consideration of others and the like the care and the appreciation and the love that you show for one another. And it's like, for as disparaging as the time traveler was of Weena, as we've said countless times, and the Eloi in general, it's like, yeah, the Eloi are fucking stupid. They don't think about any chain of consequences, and all they do is eat fruit and fuck each other all day, and they don't do anything. Like, they're fucking stupid. But even when you take all that away, you might think like, oh, well, what's left? Are they even human? And I feel like the story sort of ends with like, yes, they are, because it doesn't matter if you take all that away, as long as they still like have the capacity and they still have the tendency to like care for one another. And that's like, I think from Wells's writing here, it's sort of like that is like when you strip everything else away, even the intelligence and even the strength and everything. It's like, as long as you still have that aspect of humanity, then humanity is not extinct. The Eloi are human, and Weena is just as much of a person as anyone else. And so, like, ultimately wrapping up, I felt like it's also kind of like a further commentary on Weena as it kind of made me feel like Weena's not just like some weird object or side character that doesn't matter. She's the capstone of the entire story. It's like the book ends and there's this reflection on the contribution of Weena, who at first glance might seem very insignificant, but just like a hobbit, or even just like Gollum, sort of like bizarrely. It's like, these characters that by so many others could be very easily discounted or written off. It's like they're the ones that actually create change in the end. And so I do think that Weena's important, and I think the story thinks that Weena's important because she kind of gets the final bow through the flowers at the very end of the book.
Well said.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think you're right. I think she is I mean, yeah, maybe the most essential character that we meet, other than the time traveler himself. I mean, I think it would be much easier to write off all of the future humans or creatures he meets entirely if we didn't have Weena, who is just this character who is still, I guess, still pure at heart. It seems, where try as he might, he can't make that argument for the underworld, for the Morlocks. But yeah, I think there's definitely part of the time traveler that he takes to her in the same way that she takes to him. As strange as it may be, it is, and it does. We were talking too about how like, oh, hope that doesn't cross any boundaries here, and it didn't. It really kind of became it was more like a father-daughter relationship.
That was one thing I wanted to try to say at some point, was that his relationship with Weena did feel more like parent-child than anything else, thankfully.
Yeah. Yes.
Agreed.
But yeah, it did start off pretty weird, but I'm glad it settled into more of the like protective father to naive child format.
Yeah. I don't have a lot to add on that, but just like, definitely yes, completely. Like, I was really glad that Even though Weena herself doesn't seem to have like a great fate, for herself, like in terms of the story, Wells doesn't take their dynamic to any place that ends up being like, completely out of pocket. I think ultimately what he's trying to showcase is a lot more considerate and deep and tasteful than that. And I think that like this ending here, is good evidence for that. It's like, yeah, the time traveler misses Weena, but not in any fashion that that like muddies the waters.
Right.
It feels exactly as the way that you guys are describing it. Yeah. So yeah, that's the end of the Time Machine.
Final thoughts and ratings.
Would anyone like to go first? If not, I'll go. But how do you guys feel? Does anyone want to start?
Nose goes.
All right, I'm gonna go. Here we go. Okay.
Connor, can you also share the rating screen while we?
Oh yeah, you got it. Yep.
Yeah, please do. I think I know what I'm gonna go for here, but yeah. So this book has a cool distinction of being the shortest book that we've read and the quickest discussion that we've had on a book.
Technically, that would be Young Zaphod Plays It Safe, but since that was a part of a collection, well, definitely the smallest standalone book.
Until someone writes that sequel about saving Weena, yes.
Yep.
Yeah, Josh, thank you. That's a good.
Actually, so to kind of spin off the sequel idea, Connor, another cool concept would be the time traveler goes back and saves Weena, but is not able to save himself and sacrifices himself for Weena, setting the time machine to go back to his time period somehow. And then the time machine appears maybe a few years after he leaves, and just Weena steps out. And then everyone has to be like, wow, what? Who is this? And then the narrator takes him in his care. And I think that could be a fun story as well.
You're right. That's the cool thing about time travel stories is, one conception of what a sequel could be doesn't have to preclude another. You could write, 4 different sequels seemingly contradictory to one another, but all just branching timelines of the same core event.
Yeah. Actually, we could make a franchise out of this. And
I don't know why someone hasn't before. Yeah.
I know. And it could be every time you travel in time, it creates a separate parallel universe.
Where is the Time Machine cinematic universe? That's what I need to know. We actually might be about to discover the Time Machine cinematic universe because it sounds like there's more than one version of this movie, which is not surprising.
And we're going to be watching every single version.
Thank you.
How many versions are there?
We're going to be watching everyone. And we'll also be watching, what were we saying before? That was supposed to be a joke.
Hot Tub Time Machine.
Hot Tub Time Machine. It's not what I was thinking of, but who cares?
1 and 2.
I saw both of those movies in theaters. Hot Tub Time Machine 1 and 2. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, well, they I don't know if I saw either of them in theaters, but I'm sure that was a good time.
It's like, and the thing is, not to like pad my own admission, but Hot Tub Time Machine 1 I can understand. Honestly, that was a cultural event.
Yeah, that's
Hot Tub
fair.
Machine 2? Why did I go to that movie?
I mean, if you told me that was like a straight to DVD or a straight to on demand thing, I would have believed it.
Exactly, that was a fully theatrical release, well before streaming took over the secondary release platform. Whatever. I'm here to talk about the real Time Machine. No hot tub needed. So here's my actual final thoughts. It's really cool to revisit this book that I read during high school, I really like to go back and kind of reevaluate things, whether I like them or not, from my adolescence or my youth, and not just in a like nostalgic, oh yeah, remember this kind of way. It's like I want to know if it was like if it holds up essentially, and that's a loaded term, and that's going to vary subjectively between readers, obviously, but like this is a really cool thing for me. Like I was really excited to do this in the end, and not to be too corny about it, but like there is, just like the time traveler himself describes like a minor version of time travel as recollecting a very vivid memory. Like going back and reading a book or experiencing any kind of art from your past, I do think is like some kind of vast degree of magnitude removed, but related to time travel. And like, the copy of the Time Machine that I have here is not the copy that I read in high school, but I remember what that copy was like. It was a black cover, and it had an artist's interpretation of what the Time Machine itself looked like on it, and then it just said the Time Machine, and I was like, I thought that was so cool. All of that preamble out of the way, like just talking about the story itself. I do think that this story was interesting, and a lot of the societal commentary was like absolutely lost on me when I read it the first time. And so to come back around and to think about how the time traveler muses on how, societal trajectories and choices like could have led to the future of the Eloi and the Morlocks, and how that's kind of focused on this possibility of communism. Like I had no conception or understanding of these things in a way that was meaningful at the time, like outside of just like stupid memes, like I was just a fucking idiot for so long. Like it's crazy to think about. And so like I really appreciated kind of thinking about those things, and especially like kind of being amazed at when this story was written. This is now the oldest text that we've read for the podcast. So far, of course, but yeah, as of now. And I'm just
the Epic of Gilgamesh.
Yeah, I'm just surprised at how relatively like snappy I think the text feels. Like this was written in 1895, but reading it feels breezier than Tolkien in the 1940s and I think 50s or early 60s. At least that's my opinion. But like literally, like just the prose, the text of it itself is a smoother read, and it goes to show that a lot of that just comes from style versus from just strictly the time period from when it comes from. And I just was continually impressed with all these different ideas that Wells is playing with, from the perspective of 130 years ago. I think that he is a very forward-thinking science fiction author. And last episode in my drunken stupor, I kind of brought up this point. I was like, does he set it so far in the future that it kind of becomes fantasy? And Josh was like, well, I still think that Wells is kind of more hard sci-fi. And that was really bumping around my brain as I read these last chapters. And, he does bring up a lot of details in the text to show that his extrapolations are rooted in reality. Even the whole thing with the moss on the rocks, it's like, oh, it's only growing on the facing side of the sun, and he compares it to moss or lichen that you would see forming in caves. Like he's drawing from and making mention to these things in real life, and so I do think that last episode, even beyond my own drunkenness and mental state at the time, like, I do think that I sold him short, and that this does become a sci-fi story. And the last thing here is, on that point, I really love that Wells does not give a definitive stance on whether it even happened or not. And that I do think is very indicative of the time period, because the story is presented like a record of a conversation at a dinner party, and the reader of 1895 is meant to take it as such, as a record of the dialogue. And so, like, I really love that Wells plays with the idea, even within the story, of if it's genuine or not. And even up to the very end, the final chapter, when the narrator opens up the door, it's like, oh, I thought I just caught a glimpse of him disappearing, but then he was gone. And it's like, I just like that Wells keeps you at arm's length of the time machine. Even though I don't think you're meant to go like, oh, this is bullshit. I think that in the end, you're meant to be like, no, like, this is the story. This is really what happened. But I love that there's this idea of whether it's real or not, like, what do you take away from it? I guess what I take away from it is that even though this is a story about the future, it makes me think so much about the past. It makes me think about, like, just how equivocally intelligent people were back then. I think that people today sometimes are very quick to write off people from the past. There's even like memes of like, oh, if you gave a Victorian child a Dorito, they would like spontaneously combust. Like, we've all read that post, you know what I mean?
Yep.
But I think that Wells is like a really great showcase. Like, I think H.G. Wells could eat a Dorito and like he wouldn't fucking flinch. I think he'd look you dead in the eyes and he'd eat that whole fucking bag and he'd say like, what do you got?
No, then he'd say, this is communism.
He would, yes, he'd be like, wait a minute, communism made these Doritos? 100%. But like, I think it's very, very easy, for people today to categorize and reduce and diminish, people from 130 years ago or even prior. And I think H.G. Wells is just a fantastic example to look at and be like, how could that be? How could that be if someone from 1895 wrote this book? The only difference is, they didn't have the benefit of like the amassed collective of all humanity acquiring knowledge across time. Like the average human today and the average human of 1895 are no difference in terms of the capacity for intelligence.
Well, we are crabs now.
Yeah, we will be eventually. The true difference is, what is the information that we have available, based on all of our aggregate experiences as a species. And Wells, just by virtue of the passage of time, did not have that benefit. But if he did, I think he would have crafted an even more mind-boggling story. And I think that what he wrote here is really a testament to the intelligence of humanity across time. And I think it's fascinating and amazing and awesome to go back and read it. I'm going to give The Time Machine a 7.4 out of 10.
All right.
Sweet, yeah. Good,
Well
good thoughts, good rating.
Thanks, y'all.
Connor, would you like to go next?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, largely going into this, I didn't really expect, or I didn't really know what to expect. I guess but I was surprised pleasantly, um, for the most part. Um, I don't know. I thought I really kind of thought maybe this would be a bit more dry and harder to connect with. Like comparing this to comparing the characterization here of the time traveler, his dinner guests, Weena, um, whatever, to something like 2001's characterization, where it's like minimal uh, intrigue into the psyche of these characters. Very surface level people of their time. Like it's actually, I feel like the time traveler here feels more fleshed out than our the
David Bowman.
yes, Bowman or Haywood or whatever initially.
Hmm.
Obviously the sequel kind of changes that a bit, but so yeah, for being written during the late 19th century, I was very impressed by the depth of it, and yeah, like it is a science fiction story that is obviously groundbreaking and introduces these crazy concepts that we are now like super familiar with within the genre, and I think it definitely earns its reputation for that, but also I love that it's not like the time travel concept is not it's not just a function of like, oh wow, this is a cool idea. I want to see these wacky people in the future. They're oh wow, look, they're wearing weird clothes and they have laser guns and they have big spaceships in the sky and there's even an alien that came to visit. Um, like it's really just like an exploration of like the future of humanity, of our potential fate, and you're kind of invited to theorize alongside the time traveler himself how we get to this point. And we had a lot of fun discussing that. Obviously there's definitely some preconceived ideas in the text there from that men of that time would have, but it's smart because it acknowledges that kind of bias within the text itself. So yeah, I mean, that after that first four chapters we were discussing, like I was ready to cringe a lot reading the rest of it with its kind of summation and its the time traveler's final hypothesis. But largely I was wrong. I thought it was actually pretty well done, and uh, also I was happy that it was left ambiguous. Because it's like, 'cause, the thing about science fiction like that, whether it's like Star Trek's, gay space luxury communism, or our capitalistic hellhole dystopian future. The one thing like that a lot of stories they don't contend with is like, I mean, so far in the future, like it probably won't be called capitalism anymore. Like it'll be something totally different that um it might have been an evolution or a spin-off of our current ideologies, but it'll be something very different. And so I was very happy that it was left ambiguous. And um, I don't know. There's just a lot of food for thought in this book. Um, I think it's nice, short, sweet. I would have liked it to be a little bit longer, to be honest, because I think exploring the Morlocks a bit more would have been great. I would have loved more time with the time traveler down in the pits, exploring their habitat, their you know their little dungeon down,
Society.
their society. Yeah, if you want to call it that, a society. I guess he probably would not refer it to call it a society, but yeah, their culture. So I mean, but I guess it's better to leave some stuff up to the imagination and uh, leave them wanting more. So that's kind of how I feel after this book, and I think it's a good place to be because like Lord of the Rings, super overstuffed, and you got everything you wanted and a whole lot more in that book, in those books. And 2001 is kind of a good example as well of leaving you wanting more. Didn't really feel that way with the sequel 2010, but so yeah, I mean it leaves you in a good place. Yeah, I enjoyed it all around. um I think I am going to give it a I gotta give it a 7.6 out of 10.
7.6, you said?
Yes.
All right. Cool. So I guess it's my turn, huh?
I guess so.
You're up.
It was fun coming back to this book. It's on yet another book that I read back in high school, but it was early high school. It may have even been late middle school. Um, this book really does. It really is easy to see how this book was so foundational to science fiction and the time travel subgenre in particular. Um, and just how much of it is suffused into pop culture. You have, I mean, the Morlocks themselves, even though they're, I don't want to say not prominent, but they're not as big of a factor in the book or the story as you might assume, seeing as they're one of the few things other than the time machine itself that kind of left the book. Because I know you see references to them in like The Simpsons and Futurama, um, in several places. Basically, whenever there's like underground creatures, it's either mole people or the Morlocks. Yeah, that's kind of what it is. Um, there was something about those fucking crabs that just stuck with me all these years. I don't know what it was, but the crab stuck with me. But it was very interesting coming back reading it in a far more critical eye because we're discussing it together now. And it's not just me downloading it on a whim when I first got a Kindle for the first time in my life, and it was just like, ooh, I can get the time machine for practically free and read that whenever I want, and I never picked it up until now. it, I think Connor was right. I wish it was a little longer, um, which is something I feel like is usually a good thing to say about a book, but here might be the first time I feel like it's the shortness is detracting from it a little bit. I wish Wells had taken the time to explore not just the society that the time traveler found himself in, but just the world itself, like the actual physical setting. Um, I don't know. Maybe it's years of Doctor Who that I've been watching since then, or other time travel stories that I've consumed. It's just like I wish there was more like exploring of the concept and continuation of the story. Um, but when you're dealing with something that is literally foundational, you can only expect so much of it. But I'm glad that you guys both enjoyed the story so much. Um, I also completely forgot about all the commentary of different economic or socioeconomic uh, systems. I obviously remembered like the Aloy and the Morlocks being upper and lower class, like evolved to absurdity, but I completely forgot about that offhanded communism remark that the time traveler made, and just was not expecting how that was going to spiral for us in our conversations.
Yeah.
It is also interesting to see a story that predates space travel. Usually, when you have sci-fi, especially far future sci-fi, space travel would factor into things quite a bit. And Connor was mentioning, like, yeah, usually you'd see like an alien, and it's like, yeah, if this was written maybe 30 years later, 40 years later, that probably would have happened. There probably would have been like an embassy from Mars or Venus that was just hanging out in the ruins, um, and something like that. Maybe he would have speculated the Morlocks came from the mines of Mars or something, and were preying upon the helpless human who now call themselves Aloy. Could have been something like that.
Yeah.
Rating this was hard. It's hard to rate something that I've said foundational already, but it's just so ingrained. It's like it's almost fact for my like um my culture brain, and so I feel like it is a must read at some point
Yes.
when you're reading a book. Sorry, when you're reading fiction. Um, so I don't want to rate it too low, but I also don't feel like it's on par with like Hitchhiker's Guide or The Hobbit. I don't feel like it's like or Return of the King. I'm looking at my scores here. I feel like you guys are rating it pretty well. And when before we started getting to into our final thoughts here, I was initially thinking to myself like, what would I rate this? Maybe somewhere in the low sevens, like 7.1 or 2. So hearing you guys put it at 7.4 and 7.6 actually has made me reconsider. But I think I'm going to probably go with 7.25. Bring it up a bit out of 10. Which is weird because I didn't think that I would be rating a science fiction book, foundational science fiction book, lower than either of you guys. I thought I would probably have it at the highest because I tend to rate higher than you guys. Um, but what I feel like detracts from the story is probably its age. It is a little harder to get into unless you are really set on the Victorian storytelling format. Um, and pretty much everything we've talked about as being an issue with the story as we've experienced it. So yeah, I'm a little disappointed in myself rating it so low, but I would absolutely encourage anyone who's listening to read this book at some point. Um, and I did thoroughly enjoy reading this, but there's something telling me it shouldn't be rated too high, and I don't know why.
Yeah,
Just a feeling.
no, I mean I'm kind of right there. Like I I did feel like 7.6 I have the highest rating out of the three of us. But going into it when I was thinking of like I was like, yeah, I feel like it is clearly a classic and I really did enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, more so than other books we have read. But it's like just below the threshold of something I would call like really great, I guess,
Yeah.
for me.
Right, which isn't to be derided.
No.
It isn't to be ashamed of. I mean, when you are literally writing the foundation of an entire genre, it doesn't have to be the greatest, and it probably shouldn't be the greatest, because then how else is anyone going to build upon it?
Yeah.
So I think that's why classic, foundational, those are the right words to use for this, and those don't necessarily have to be the synonyms to greatest, but it's still
Exactly.
good and great depending on your point of view.
Exactly.
And
It's
it's also a quick read. So like we were talking about it before the podcast started. We actually stuck to our fucking schedule here and managed to read a whole book in 3 weeks. It was a short book, but we managed to do it. we stuck to our schedule. Good job, guys. I'm
Yeah.
proud of you.
No, good for us.
Pat yourselves on the back, gentlemen.
No, I'm glad to. And it is a good reminder, that the rankings are reflective of our experience reading the book
Mm-hmm.
only within the boundaries of this specific read through. So, like, the number is not counting the countless references you've seen, potential. I don't want to speak for you, but like,
Right.
it's probably not counting like, oh, the cultural impact of it. And like, what was it like when you read it the first time? These number is reflective of your most recent read through right now. Yeah.
They are very subjective. Yes.
And just like you're saying, a book being a classic or a book being something that you would recommend to read doesn't mean that it's going to be some paragon of its genre. It's like sometimes things are actually worth reading because of their flaws. Not to say that this is even true for the Time Machine, but like, when you go back and you read something from a different time, you should expect to come up against things that are different from your modern notions of what makes a perfect story, or like your conceptions of narrative structure, or even maybe questioning some of your things you take for granted in terms of like morality, and like all of these things are connected to different time periods, which is funny to discuss in terms of a time travel book. But whatever you give this book in terms of a numerical score, it doesn't mean it's not worth reading, because it is structural in terms of like the canon of science fiction. It doesn't mean that it's a perfect book. It means that in order for you to have a better understanding of sci-fi itself, of literature itself, of stories, that this is a book worth reading. So I don't think there's any contradiction in how you did that, Josh. I think it makes perfect sense, and I'm right there with you.
Thank you. Yeah. So I'm glad overall we gave this book a 7.4 out of 10 crabs.
Yes.
So before we wrap up, I want to say I looked up how many movies we have ahead of us. Because for our listeners, we will be transitioning into a movie podcast for a couple of weeks as we work through other forms of media that this book spawned. But according to Wikipedia, there are 3 movies of the Time Machine from 1960, 1978, and 2002.
Interesting.
But pertinent to our previous conversation, Wikipedia also lists 4 sequels from different authors.
Wow.
Oh my god.
There's The Space Machine, which doesn't have much on it in the little blurb that Wikipedia does when you mouse over it. There's Morlock Knight from 1979, which, just based on the cover, is a Morlock that looks like a fucking troll right out of like the early, or like an orc from Lord of the Rings, just like hunched over on the seat of the time machine, popping into like Victorian England. So that one looks interesting. There's Time After Time, which appears to be H.G. Wells actually building a time machine himself and chasing down Jack the Ripper to the 1970s.
What the fuck?
Yep. And then there's one that is actually an official sequel to the Time Machine, as signed off by the H.G. Wells estate, which was it's called The Time Ships by Stephen Baxter, and it is, according to Wikipedia, a canonical sequel to The Time Machine. And this was written in 1995 for the centennial of the book. So I might be adding this to my reading list, at least. Maybe Morlock Knight as well. Because just based off the cover... Hang on.
Yeah.
I'm going to share my screen. Whoops. I want you to see this cover. If I can zoom in. Now I need to change my presentation here. I think I need to do that. Sorry. Share screen. Do window. Share. So, Connor, if you could share that. I just look at this cover here.
Wow, that looks amazing.
Yeah, I love the prominence of the top hats already. Like, it's like, I know that's not the focus, but it's like, yeah, this motherfucker is coming to Victorian England.
Holy
Yeah.
shit.
Oops. Sorry. But yeah, that's quite the 1970s cover, and I'm definitely going to be adding some stuff to my reading list, having browsed Wikipedia during our conversation here.
This is fantastic. I mean, I shouldn't be surprised by this. I love that not only are there actual sequels, both canonical and otherwise, to this work of public domain, but it also, I hate to say this, it also means that we have still yet to read a work that is completely in isolation to itself.
Well, all of those books that I listed off, those are different authors. This is the only time machine that, or this is the only story in this universe that H.G. Wells, the original author, wrote, not counting short stories. Apparently, there was some version of the, I was reading Wikipedia, there's something called The Gray Man, which is literally a short story. It was like the entire text was on Wikipedia, and it's like a page. That seemed to be like an extra stop he made before he reached the crab people, where he throws a rock at a guy who turns out to be like the last human descendant or something, and then he continues on to the crabs or something. I wouldn't call that a book. That was just a short story in serialization. But yeah, you're not wrong that it's the only, but I don't think.
Yeah.
Excuse me. I don't think you'll ever be right.
As long as there's one
canonical all the way down, yeah.
Well, I just think there's at least one sequel or one additional book that's been like canonized by the estate, by the official H.G. Wells estate, that does like feel like something different than the unauthorized sequels written because it's from the public domain, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think Connor is right, really. I mean, once we read a single book that was written after like modern copyright law was established, that truly doesn't have any actual sequels, I think then we can say finally we've read a standalone.
I think you're splitting hairs. I think this is considered a good standalone. I think Left Hand of Darkness was standalone, honestly.
Yeah, that's fair.
And if you keep going by this, we'll read every fucking book in the Library of Congress before you decide that everything is just derived from the Code of Hammurabi. So we're just
everything's a spin-off of the Bible, really.
There definitely are books that are just books. Period. No, I mean, like there just has to
dictionary.
be. There just has to be books to which there is no extenuating.
Of course there is.
And yes, even if it is maybe unfair to say that some of these books we've read are not standalone, it's like that's ridiculous. I agree. Like these are still standalone books, but like if you really, really want to go by a technicality, it's sort of like maybe not. It doesn't matter. I just wanted to throw it out there. I think that's all we have to say on the Time Machine. It was really cool to read a book in 3 weeks. Maybe we keep it up. We're going to be talking about that after we discuss the movie for the Time Machine. So be on the lookout for a discussion of the Time Machine movie or movies. We'll see how we tackle it.
Movie marathon, baby.
Hot Tub Time Machine, who knows?
Or each one of us watches a different version of the movie.
Right, and then we all
that'd be such a nightmare.
We all come together and try to talk about it. That'd be good stuff. And then once we get through that, we will be determining what we're going to read next. So be sure to keep it here for all things Chapter Chumps. Connor, can you take us away?
Yeah, if you enjoyed what you have heard, and I hope you did. head on over to Apple Podcasts and give us a 5-star rating and a nice review. That would be much appreciated. You can follow us on social media. We are on both Twitter and Blue Sky at Chapter Chumps. I would encourage you to share your thoughts on the Time Machine with us, please. If you've read the book or have memories of reading the book or want to read
Want
the
to talk about the
book
crabs?
or if you have big crab thoughts. If you love the crabs, let us know. We would love to talk. We would love to have some crab talk. That's all I'll say. That's all I'll say. Um, and you could also email us, chapterjumpspod@gmail.com, if that's more your speed. But yeah, look forward to next time. We'll be diving into the wonderful world of movies. And as always, folks, until next time.
Crab people,
Crab people taste like
Crab
crab,
people
talk
taste
like
like
people.
crab, talk like
Yes,
people.
dude.
Yes,
How did you? I
crab
was gonna do
people.
crab people too. We are all crab, dude. I love you guys.
I wanted to do crab rave, but I don't know how to do music on this
It's okay.
this format with the
Crab
Streamlabs
people
thing
is the
that
way to
Connor's
go.
using.
We're
Crab
all
people
crabs in the end.
is the way to go.